Thanks for all those who took the time to join us here on Zoom and also on Facebook and online via YouTube at Chosen to Glow Ministries. My name is Sarah Buckland. I am representing Chosen to Glow Ministries, and I'll be your host for today. For those who haven't been with us before, today is actually the 6th of our 9-part series on the theme Christianity, Conspiracy, Colonial, or Compelling. So as I mentioned, today is actually an extra special 3 hours of riveting lineups that we have for you. And we will also be including a special Did You Know bits in between each of the speakers and a special announcement during the broadcast of a new mentorship initiative. So we do encourage you to stay tuned with us as much as you can. So as you would have heard, this evening we center on the topic, are science and the Bible compatible? Our topic today is one of the most asked questions that has been a stumbling block for many to consider Christianity. Many of us have been told by the media or even in our education system that science somehow disproves that God exists. And we are often told that science is a fact and that religion is blind faith. So many also wonder, in an era of updated scientific discovery, is an ancient text like the Bible really relevant to postmodern life? Unfortunately, questions like these are often left unaddressed by the church and even frowned upon. But today we do attempt to tackle these questions head on. And to help us with these questions, we've invited 5 very esteemed guests from the fields of astronomy, chemistry, physics, paleobiochemistry, and mathematics, some of whom were introduced to their scientific fields as staunch unbelievers. We thank you so very much for joining us, for taking your time and effort to present to us today for all of our speakers. But before we go any further, we will ask Minister Joseph Buckland to lead us with an opening prayer.
Thank you, Sarah, and welcome to all of our guests. I see one of my teachers, Brother Mike. Hello, Brother Mike. Good to have you here with us in Jamaica. Let us go to God in prayer. Father in heaven, I give you thanks for all of the special guests who have come to participate with us in a discussion on the question, science and the Bible, can they mix? I give you thanks, dear Lord, for them making the time and making the sacrifice to study and to prepare themselves for this occasion. And we ask that your Holy Spirit will guide the proceedings and that everything will be done for edification. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. All right. So just by way of reminding our audience, please do ensure that your mics are muted through the presentations, but also please feel free to type your questions in the chat as you think of them. So we will actually be having separate question and answer segments after each presentation. So we will try to get to all of your questions. But right before we get into this evening's discussion, we have a special announcement as usual for our weekly winner for the Youth for Truth Challenge. So last week, our question was based on the discussion on why would a loving God allow suffering? And I'm going to share my screen to just announce our winner as well as our honorable mention for today. All right, so our honorable mention for week 5 is no other than Miss Janelle Campbell from Jamaica Theological Seminary, and this was her entry.
Hi, my name is Janelle Campbell, and I'm here to share with you today on the topic of suffering. Now, suffering is happening because mankind has corrupted the paradise that God created for us. But why does God allow suffering to happen? Right? Affliction forces us to actually reconsider our opinion of God's mercy. Romans 8 verse 18 says, "For I reckon that the suffering of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory which shall be revealed in us." So there's a positive aspect to suffering, and what it does is to point our attention to God's mercy and His grace. Right, there's another point that I want to share with you, and it's God's sovereignty. Now, God is sovereign overall of creation because He created us, and there are things that He will do that we will never be able to understand. And that is why as Christians we are called to follow God out of faith. Right? So just trust. I want us to all trust Him regardless of what is happening, that he is doing something good, and the work that he has started in us, he will finish it. Thank you.
Thank you, Janelle. And
Hi.
for our grand prize winner this week, we have Miss Danielle Olivia Grant.
Without the existence of God, evil and suffering would still exist. God, in all his glorious love, chose to give man free will. Man's free will caused God's perfect world to become a place of greed, corruption, and suffering, which gave birth to world hunger, poverty, and death. Our Heavenly Father will not allow suffering forever. Revelations 21:4 tells us that there will come a time when there will be no more death, sorrow, crying, and pain. You see, 2 Peter 3:9 infers that God allows suffering because his wish for man is for them to not be destroyed, but to give us time to turn from the choices that goes against his will. But let us take heart. God provides comfort amidst our suffering through his word. He says, "Come to me all who are heavy laden, and he will give you rest." He says he is close to the brokenhearted. He says he is a very present help in times of trouble. May Christ's peace be with you always. Amen.
Wow, thank you, Danielle, for your entry, and Janelle, and all of who have been entering our challenges. We'd like to extend a hearty congratulations to you all, and we will inbox you of your prize. And if you have not entered, especially, please know that there are 3 more weeks that we have to go, so you can join us to win meaningful prizes from our sponsors. And you're all one step closer to being eligible for our grand prizes of gift certificates tenable at Christian Book, Recharge Lifestyle, and a museum tour, along with many other exciting prizes. All right, so now into our topic for today. Our first session for today will actually focus on the topic of physics and faith, finding the fingerprint of God. Some of us tuning in, whether here in the meeting or online, might be physicists, and this is the theme for our first Did You Know factoid. So before I actually before I introduce our speaker, right, did you know that 2 of the most notable physicists, Michael Faraday and Sir Isaac Newton, were serious believers in God and the Bible? It is said that Isaac Newton actually spent more time studying the Bible than studying math and physics. And so our first guest today, James Stroud, is following in the steps of these noble men of physics. So just to introduce our first speaker, Mr. Stroud has a background of, he has a wide background actually, philosophy of religion, ancient history, and astronomy. So Mr. Stroud actually worked at the University of Arkansas microbiology lab for 4 years while completing his degree in philosophy of religion. He went on then to get his master's in ancient history and is an MS candidate in astronomy. Mr. Stroud has authored multiple books in Christian apologetics and was accepted in the Discovery Institute's 2-week science and faith workshop in Seattle in 2016. Mr. Stroud and his wife run a creation-based museum in Eureka Springs, Arkansas. And Mr. Stroud also works as an ambassador in Logos Research Associates. If you want to find Mr. Stroud and his work, we have 2 links on the screen and we can copy them in the chat, creationhistory.org and also logosresearchassociates.org. I'm going to stop sharing now, and James Stroud, Mr. Stroud, you can begin your presentation. We all look forward to it. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you very much. Hopefully you can see my screen. I'm going to go ahead and take my camera off just so it will be take a little bit less away from bandwidth here. So yeah, first of all, good evening, and thank you to Sarah for the honor of being able to be the warm-up act for a great lineup of speakers you have tonight. I'm definitely the lightweight here with this group of speakers. And again, like she said, my name is James Stroud. And not that it's overly impressive, again, like Sarah was saying, a BA in philosophy of religion, master's in ancient history, candidate in MS for space studies. We'll see how that goes. And again, have worked at a microbiology lab for a few years and whatnot. And again, though I definitely don't speak for, obviously, or represent Logos Research Associates holistically, I am an ambassador with them, and I can't recommend the group enough. So definitely check them out at logosresearchassociates.org, as well as my humble 1990s looking website at creationhistory.org. And 15 minutes, I thought you said 50 minutes, Sarah. Just kidding. Obviously, in 15 minutes, I'm going to have to pretty much go at warp speed. So I considered touching on several different topics, from irreducible complexity, how that ties into physics, how we can detect design, how the very nature of mathematics speaks to God's existence. But basically, I ended up deciding to pretty much hone in on the fine tuning and how that interplays with physics and faith. And that would serve as the best overall topic in the time we have here this evening. And again, there's only so much we can cover, but definitely don't hesitate to reach out to me. Videos, more articles, and my contact information at creationhistory.org. So again, within physics and looking at that as the fingerprints of God, it reminds me a lot of J. Warner Wallace's bestseller, God's Crime Scene. And in some ways, that's kind of exactly what we're going to be looking at tonight. Is there fingerprints that point back to God within physics? So first of all, let's define some terms. Some of these seem self-explanatory. Obviously, biblical Christianity, religion derived from Christ, based on the Bible as sacred scripture. Physics, the branch of science concerned with the nature and properties of matter and energy. And then science, which originally just meant knowledge, but it's basically came today to mean the intellectual and practical activity encompassing the systematic study of the structure and behavior of the physical and natural world through observation and experiment. So some people will make the comment to differentiate, let's say, physics from some of the other sciences. And you'll hear some scientists refer to physics as the quote, in quote, serious science. Even though I don't necessarily agree with the term, the reason some people, like, for example, agnostic David Berlinski, comes up with this type terminology is that unlike some fields of science, physics uses math as its foundation. So we can really hone in much more within a specific field of science by using math as a foundation. And just to give you a very quick example, if you've seen the movie Interstellar, basically physics plays a huge part in this. And when I say that, it basically starts off with theoretical physics. So in other words, there's math behind this. And if the theory works on paper, more or less, then they can usually, not always, but move to the testing stage. This was the main premise behind the movie, as far as looking kind of at a black hole, the cosmology, and whatnot surrounding that. And moreover, it's the same physics that gets us to what is often called fine-tuning of the universe. So the fine-tuning can be equated to the fact that it takes 26 fundamental constants to give us our universe, but they still don't give us everything. And I think that's important to point out. There's more than 100 different parameters for the universe that must have values falling within a narrowly defined range for physical life of any conceivable kind to even be able to exist. And this is what we're going to be looking at this evening. These parameters could be gravity. You know, for example, if it's a little bit more, we die. If it's a little bit less, we die. So think of this whole thing as a switchboard, and each one of these represent at least the 26 constants honed in perfectly for life to be even possible. And really quick, let's just define what we mean by probability at a very high level. Usually, if you hear somebody say there's a 99% chance of rain tomorrow, it's a pretty good chance it's going to rain. You know, with weather people, you never know. But I mean, if you look at a six-sided dice, pretty obvious there's a 1 in 6 chance of you getting it. Flip a coin, there's a 50-50 chance. And so really, when we look at probability, it's basically just going to be the extent to which an event is likely to occur, measured by the ratio of the favorable cases to the whole number of cases possible. And this does become important within physics as well as fine tuning. And the normal cadence, keep in mind, this is a little bit subjective, but it's the normal scientific consensus, which I think is very generous, is 1 times 10 to the 50, which is basically, just think of this as 1 with 50 zeros behind it. So instead of saying 99.9, it would be 99.99999 with 50 nines behind it. It pretty much means it's likely to happen. And that's kind of what we're going to be bouncing some of these statistics off of. So the main point is, why is it agreed today that we live in a finely tuned universe, and how does that exhibit the quote unquote fingerprints of God? And how do we get to the point of things being called a very fortunate universe that you'll hear some physicists say? Well, one of the striking discoveries over the last 50 years in physics has been that the laws and constants of physics, in other words, the numbers that govern the operation of the universe holistically, unexpectedly conspire in an absolutely crazy way to make the universe habitable for life. In other words, the universe is finely tuned on an absolute razor's edge that defies mere chance. And it's better explained as a work by an intelligent mind, a creator, God, fill in the blank. It's like if you go outside at night and instead of seeing the stars, you see the 100 dials that I referred to earlier. Some of these dials have millions, some billions, and some trillions of possibilities. And every single one of these are calibrated to the exact precision so that life can exist. And that is the world we get from contemporary physics. And let me just give you just a few examples. Each one of these dials would represent a parameter of physics that is finely tuned. Let's just look at a few of these, just to kind of give you guys a high level understanding here. One of them would be the force of gravity. The force of gravity is finely tuned to the point that if you could picture a ruler that stretches across the entire supposed, which again, not to get into that, I won't, but I'll talk to this with secular universities, the supposed universe of 13.7 billion light years. Imagine 1-inch increments being broken up within that 13.7 billion years. And that illustrates or gives you a good idea of the range of possibilities that gravity could be calibrated. But it is calibrated at the exact range for life to be permitted. If it was 1 inch off from where it is currently, life at a higher form could not exist. Gravity is a pinch too small. If gravity is a pinch too small or less, our cells collapse. If it's too much more, our cells can't hold together. So, I mean, there are a plethora of other impacts, and this is just one example. Another example is the cosmological constant, which sounds like a fancy word, but it just means the energy density of space. What's important here is it needs to be, again, on a razor's edge for the universe to even exist. If the number was larger, positive, stars and galaxies would not exist. If larger and negative, the universe would collapse in on itself. So how perfect is it? It would be 1 part in 1 million, billion, 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 billion. And when we say these terms like this, keep in mind, like, I don't know much higher than, you know, a trillion. So if you say trillion, okay, I can figure that out. That's quadrillion, but the numbers become so big, I'm not even sure what they're called. So you'll hear physicists refer to this as 1 million. And then again, you will see this kind of going exponentially, billion, 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 billion. So effectively, it's beyond comprehension. And again, there are about 100 of these dials, but just taking the force of gravity and the cosmological constant, and the precision is so great that for life to even be possible, we're looking at 1 part in 100 million trillion, 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 trillion. And yes, I didn't miss a trillion. I went and triple checked that. And again, this is just 2 parameters. So I hope you're beginning to sense what we mean when we say the universe is fine-tuned for the existence of life. And again, just a couple of more really quick ones here. And again, I highly encourage you, research this for yourself, fact check, etc. But the strong nuclear force that binds the nucleus of atoms together, if you were to decrease the strong nuclear force by just 1 part in 10,000 billion, then all you would have in the universe is hydrogen, and life utterly impossible. And groups like Answers in Genesis, ICR, a lot of these great creation organizations have honed in on this. And again, I just want you to kind of open your mind to some of these numbers because it's beyond comprehension. Last one, just to drive the point home in the time we have, is the ratio of the electromagnetic force to the gravitational force. It's an expression of physics that's measurable, which is fine-tuned to 1 part in 10,000 trillion. So I know at this point you're probably saying, hey, how do we understand these numbers in real terms? Well, I'm glad you asked. J. Warner Wallace, as well as Lee Strobel, a lot of people use these type of examples, but I think this one is pretty good and it really hits the nail on the head, so to speak. Let's just assume that you had the entire continent of North America covered in dimes, and that means the dimes are literally side by side. Okay, you're like, wow, that is a lot of dimes. Well, go ahead now and take it all the way to the moon. You're like, wow, that's a lot of dimes. You know what? Let's go ahead and multiply that by 1 billion. Okay, now go ahead and just blindfolded, I marked one of those dimes blue. Go and find it. And you come back and you say, hey, I found it. Well, that is 1 in 10 to the 37 chance. And that gives you an example of the absolute fine tuning here. Another good example, if anybody likes cards, a royal flush. And again, these are just very easy to digest terminology. If you look at a royal flush, if you have 1 million people playing cards tonight, well, somebody's probably going to get a royal flush because it's 1 in 650,000. Well, if you're playing with somebody and they get one, you're like, wow, that is crazy. Well, that's 1 in 10 to the 5.8 probability of getting that. If they then get a second one, you're like, okay, this is becoming weird. I hope this guy's not cheating. That's 1 in 422 billion chance. Well, by the time they get 3 in a row, you're talking 1 in 275 trillion or 1 in 10 to the 16th. You start thinking, okay, there's got to be something going on. This is a joke. This person's cheating, etc. Well, the precision required to calibrate just the strength of gravity is going to be 6 royal flushes in a row. Now, the precision required to calibrate the energy density, the cosmological constant that we talked about earlier, is 1 in 10 to the 90th, which basically means you have to get 28 straight royal flushes. So I hope you're beginning to see that this whole luck or chance hypothesis is just crazy. And that's why you get even skeptical non-Christian physicists saying it's shocking to find how many of these familiar constants of the universe lie within a very, very narrow range that makes life possible. If a single one of these accidents were altered, stars could never form, the universe would fly apart, DNA would not exist, life as we know it would be impossible. Earth would flip on its side or freeze, and so on. So again, the bottom line here is we are left explaining the fine-tuning by being due either to chance, necessity, or design. Well, we've already hopefully ruled out the chance hypothesis, and necessity really is ruled out simply because there's no reason or evidence to suggest that fine-tuning is necessary, since the constants and quantities are not determined by the laws of nature. And I can't think of anyone off the top of my head that just says, well, no, it has to be formed this way. On the flip side, everything we know of mind or design that is beyond space, time, and matter points to God and is spoken at throughout the Bible, as we'll touch on briefly. And one thing that I'm not going to go into here, obviously, but just a point to ponder. Even if all this happens, you're basically left with an empty fishbowl, a perfect Earth, a perfect environment, but you still don't have life. That is a whole nother conjecturing of probabilities to get life from non-life that the Bible does just fine explaining on its own. Now, one thing that is important to notate here, that unlike many apologetic arguments, there is virtually no denying that fine-tuning is real and accepted as such by all scientists, even if some may only accept it as quote unquote apparent design. Again, you'll have certain creation organizations, good, bad, in the middle. Robin Collins has done some really great work here. Privileged Planet was one of the early areas whenever I was able to meet with Gonzalez and Richards on exactly what the fine tuning is. Again, Hugh Ross, love him or hate him. Again, the fine tuning, same thing. Jason Lyle's done some great work on this. There's been several good articles, Answers in Genesis, CRI, ICR, lots of good groups here that have honed in on this. And even mentioning that, you have agnostics like Paul Davies. There is for me more powerful evidence that there is something going on behind all of this. It seems as though somebody has fine-tuned the nature numbers to make the universe. The impression of design is overwhelming. Again, Stephen Hawking, quote unquote atheist. The remarkable fact is that the values of these numbers seem to have been very finely adjusted to make possible the development of life. And again, what do we see from scripture? The heavens proclaim the glory of God. The skies display his craftsmanship. Day after day, they continue to speak. Night after night, they make him known. And again, you see verses like this over and over. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal purpose and divine nature has been clearly seen, understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse. For by him, all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers, rulers or authorities, all things were created by him and for him. And again, we will have, you'll hear people say, reference the multiverse. I was originally going to touch on that, but within 15 minutes, it's hard to really get into much detail here. But I kind of agree with the atheist philosopher whose name escapes me, but who basically calls the multiverse a religion for atheists. And I tend to agree. So with that, I definitely encourage you guys to definitely keep researching. And again, most importantly, the Bible speaks of this fine tuning and design throughout both the Old and New Testaments. When you look at the God of the Bible, I think you very clearly begin to see these fingerprints of God as these verses allude, and fine tuning is just one of many that you will hear about tonight. Thank you, and God bless.
Wow, thank you so much, Mr. Stroud. What you have presented was so very interesting. So it's likely that many of us will have many burning questions. So actually, we'll now have our first question and answer section, because we don't want it to be an echo chamber. So we want to hear your questions, and all the panelists can join in also in answering as well. But I have a few questions of my own at first. All right, my first question is basically because you mentioned a lot of technical information, cosmological constants, fine tuning, and math, that word. Some of our brains might have turned off at that word. So just could you break it down for us who are not scientists? Could you review just very briefly, what do you mean by fine tuning? And what does this have to do with the Bible? What's the connection and implications of what you have shared with having faith in the God of the Bible?
Yeah, great question. And keep in mind, I'm not a quote unquote scientist either. So it took me a while to grapple with a lot of these arguments like this. Now, on the flip side of that, if I can mostly get this, then anyone can. So I think the biggest takeaway for me is, let me just give you my own story in a very quick nutshell. I always considered myself Christian, but while working at the University of Arkansas's microbiology labs in the late 90s, an atheist lab tech challenged me pretty bluntly. I mean, she basically said, "Hey, James, do you honestly believe there's a God?" And when I said yes, she hit me with question after question. And I pretty much couldn't answer any of them. And I was like, don't know. What was that last one? Yeah, I don't know. So pretty much that's where apologetics kind of began to come in. And that really, I think, strengthened my faith. And again, that doesn't mean apologetics is a salvation type issue, of course. And the witness of the Holy Spirit, is more than enough. And we're not trying to just win an argument. But 1 Peter 3:15, as far as your question on the Bible, I mean, it tells us to always be prepared to give an answer for those who ask about the faith that we have. So my biggest takeaway is that all the evidence is on the side of Christ, because Christ is truth. And we'll never have all the arguments down. I mean, too many Christians get scared of professors who are, the angry atheist type. But hopefully the talks tonight will showcase, that their bark is much worse than their bite. So, I mean, as far as the implications, I think that in a growingly secular and hostile world to the faith, I think that these connections, as far as saying, like spelling that out, chance, necessity, or design, at least it starts to add in what you call a cumulative case argument that begins to hopefully show Christians that the evidence is on our side because truth is truth.
All right, great answer. So before we open up to the audience, just thinking back from high school, studying chemistry and physics and geography, as science students, we are really taught to rely on the scientific method for the pursuit of knowledge. So how can one really convince a scientist who relies really on rationality and empirical evidence to embrace faith? Isn't faith by definition something that is based on what you cannot see?
Yeah, great question. And what I have presented hopefully shows that there is order and hallmarks of intelligent design. What most don't recognize is that the scientific method itself makes assumptions based on faith that are not provable through material methods. Is the scientific method itself based on science or faith? Are we making assumptions by using the scientific method itself? Are we assuming that there is order and repeatability in the universe? How do we know that the scientific method itself is a reliable way of finding objective knowledge? And finally, keep in mind what I touched on earlier was we're kind of presenting what hopefully is a cumulative case argument tonight. In other words, let's say that design isn't a knockdown, but it forces us to come to grips with it being way stronger than chance or necessity. Well, then we move on to, let's say, the objectivity of morals, the chances of life arising from non-life versus a creator that, brought us into being. Then you also add in the amazing historicity of the Bible, and you start building what I really, a cumulative case argument, a chair with multiple legs. And the more you build these legs, I think that's the more rational to the thinking. And it kind of pulls that pursuit of knowledge you mentioned together, in my humble opinion.
Well, thank you so much. It's very interesting what you've said, about the assumptions that we make as scientists in just using the scientific method itself, because basically you have to assume that there are things that are repeatable, that we're not going to be seeing randomness, that we can actually deduce laws. And, it's really something to think about. What is the science and what is the philosophy? Is it the science that rules out God? Or is it a naturalistic philosophy that will say it cannot have anything that you cannot see or touch directly to actually say that God exists or doesn't? So we'll now open up to the audience very quickly. I do have a comment that was sent by Dr. Thomas to me. He says, it is crazy how many atheist scientists believe that interstellar is accurate and plausible, but God isn't. I don't know if he wants to unmute his mic, and if any of the panelists want to just comment on that, or if that comment is fine in itself.
I was just alluding to the movie because and I read some articles around the time that it came out. I don't know if anyone has watched it. Someone essentially is able to travel into the past in the movie. And a lot of scientists came out to say, based on the science, this is accurate. And, it just was kind of baffling to me that they would think that something that seems so bizarre could be so real and still not think that God is even plausible. His existence, yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. All right. I don't know if anyone wants to do any further comments, but Mic is open, the floor is open. If you have any questions, don't be afraid. Even if you're not a believer at this time, if you have any questions, we have the people here who are scientists that can help you along, you know, just to answer your questions. So this is the time for it.
And personally, just to add a word to that, now I agree 100%. There was a lot of conjecture within the movie as far as, I mean, for example, it's amazing when I talk to someone, especially a skeptic, let's say dark matter, dark energy, I say, is there any proof that those even exist? Well, no, exactly. So there are, it is crazy kind of to use the words of, oh my gosh, I'm drawing a blank, but I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. I think that definitely adds into what you were saying about the movie. Now, there are certain little elements, like for example, Russell Humphreys. I've always enjoyed, again, not that he's right or wrong, but thinking outside the box as a creationist. And he looked kind of at a white hole cosmology as far as, you know, potentially being, you know, universe 10,000 years or less. And kind of looking at that same time dilation, which again, I agree with you 100% about the fabrication of the movie. I think it's just more one of those things that, again, once you start peeling back the layers, points to creation in God.
All right, great. We do have another question. Francesca Tavares was asking us to speak a bit more about the faith aspect of the scientific method, and she found that point to be interesting. So if any of our panelists want to just speak about what type of assumptions we make as scientists in the operationalism or operationalization of science itself, are we making assumptions that would basically borrow from the Christian worldview? Okay, Dr. Yeah, sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
I could comment quickly. When we look at the whole process of science, it does work on the basis of assuming there are these scientific laws that are consistent, that they're the same everywhere. We use laws of logic, and all those things are great. Atheists expect us to be logical when we're speaking with them, but their own worldview cannot support the idea of the laws of logic. The laws of logic are not a physical thing. You can't take them into a laboratory and weigh them and paint them and bend them. They're non-physical things, but an atheist can't explain where do these non-physical things come from. If the only thing that exists is matter and energy, where did these non-physical laws of logic come from that they like to use and they expect us to use? Same thing with the laws of science, but they're very naturally rooted in the Christian worldview. God himself is a non-physical being. He's the same everywhere and he does not change. He created a universe that operates under laws of logic that they themselves are non-physical. They're the same everywhere and they do not change. So the laws of logic and the laws of science make perfect sense within the Christian worldview, but they're totally antithetical or against an atheistic worldview.
Thank you so much. That was so beautifully said. All right, so the floor is still open. I do have more questions if no one else has.
Sarah, Dr. Sarfati wrote on the chat that you can check his article, creation.com/whyscience, that it goes through the presuppositions required for science. Also creation.com/roots documents how science grew up in the Christianized European Middle Ages. So if you check your chat, you will see what Dr. Sarfati has put there.
Yes,
He also
yes.
says the atheists, we should accept only empirically verifiable claims. And he says, how did you empirically verify that claim?
Right, they're always starting assumptions, and it's very important that we do recognize these things as we reason with even unbelievers, because many times we don't even realize what we are assuming, and that you cannot really function as even a scientist or just living as a normal human being without having that type of some basic assumptions that logic is real, that matter is real, that there is order and repeatability, especially when we're dealing with the scientific method. So thanks so much. We do that. That's a very important point that came up. I'm not sure if I'm missing anything else in the chat, but if I am, you can just alert me. Feel free to unmute your mics. But I will go ahead and continue asking my questions. So I'm going to shift a little bit away from necessarily a physics argument, James, but basically looking at history. So I've heard the argument, doesn't history show us that the church was hindering scientific progress? So I remember in high school reading a book in my library that the discoveries of Galileo, for example, were punished by the church. What would you actually say to that? Any of the panelists, I'm opening it out to anyone who has a comment on that.
No, that's a great point, and that's one that I oftentimes get brought up. Also, first, real quick disclaimer, if I said anything wrong about the physics, Jay Seegert will correct me. He's actually got a background in physics, so just FYI. But no, as far as your question goes, I mean, it's a great point. It's one I hear, you know, pretty often, and it's usually either taken out of context or at least fabricated. My friends at Discovery Institute, for example, wrote a book. It was called The Unofficial Guide to the Cosmos. I think that's it, where they review Neil deGrasse Tyson's science series Cosmos, which was playing off the late Carl Sagan's documentary by the same name. And again, like, let's take Galileo, for example. First of all, most people don't mention that Galileo confirmed that the Bible was the Word of God. Also, the truth, you know, was that this wasn't church versus science, that a lot of times you hear this false equivocation made to. Most scientists at the time also agreed that Galileo was wrong. And in the end, these scientists were wrong. So the bottom line here is that, you know, I mean, the church in theory is fallible, but, you know, God's word is not. So it would be, you know, in other words, if the church taught that the earth was flat, well, that doesn't mean the Bible teaches it. So it just kind of goes back to judging, for example, Christianity by Christ, not his followers. And that sometimes messes things up along the way. But yeah, you do hear these fabrications sometimes made that, you know, Christianity is anti-science. That's the furthest thing from the truth. It's, of course, you're going to have examples where the church may have went one way or the other. You may have the Crusades, you may have several other things, but it really is more of a sidebar conversation than taking away from, for example, the fingerprints of God.
All right. Yes. So we will deal with the globe Earth. Dr. Sarfati, I believe Mr. Seegert might touch on that. So we do have time for maybe one more question. If anyone else has a burning question, if not, I will just speak about my other question or start the introduction for the next speaker. All right.
Sarah.
Yes, Marcia. No problem. No problem.
Sorry. Good evening, everyone. I just want to pick up on what the original statement was, that science claims to explain everything. I know there was a recorded debate with AP's Peter Atkins and then Dr. Christopher William Craig, where he actually listed out 5 things that science cannot prove, like logic and math, metaphysical truths, ethical beliefs, aesthetic beliefs, and even science itself, because a lot of these things are riddled with certain assumptions that we cannot physically prove. We have to just assume them to be true in order to carry out some of these scientific methods that we do. The example he actually stated in the program was I don't remember the example to be honest, but yeah, that alone showed evidence that there is a connection between where science can be used in our assistance to help God's cause in a lot of ways. Because if you look at a lot of these discoveries, a lot of them who made these things are Christians. A lot of Nobel Prize winners, I think, was in one century, I think it was the 20th or the 19th century, were Christians. So I think it's a false dichotomy that people are pushing.
All right. Very, very good comment, Marcel. Or I believe that you will love Dr. Sarfati's next presentation. Dr. Sarfati, Marcel is a PhD candidate in chemistry. So anyway, thanks again. Thanks also to Mr. Stroud again for your very insightful presentation and responses. All right, so our next topic for presentation is biochemistry, the science of intelligent design. Before we introduce our speaker, Dr. Jonathan Sarfati, it's time for our second Did You Know factoid. All right, so let me just share my screen properly. So in high school, I remember studying Boyle's Law and learning also about Antoine Lavoisier and Gregor Mendel when I was studying for a school challenge quiz. But I did not know that how important faith was actually in motivating their scientific discoveries. So it's actually stated that Robert Boyle said, a deeper understanding of science was a higher glorification of God. All right, so following closely in the footsteps of these men of chemistry is Dr. Jonathan Sarfati. Jonathan Sarfati is a world-renowned chemist, spectroscopist. Please forgive my stumbling. All right, so you can bet how, all right, and published author on the interface between science and the Christian faith. Dr. Sarfati studied science at the Victoria University of Wellington and has published in prestigious academic journals, including Nature, at the tender age of 22. For those of us who publish, we know how difficult it is to go into these prestigious journals. So Dr. Sarfati is a co-founder of the Wellington Christian Apologetic Society, New Zealand, and he's presently a research scientist and editorial consultant for Creation Ministries International. Dr. Sarfati is also an award-winning chess master and is married to Sherry Sarfati, and they enjoy spending time with their 2 granddaughters. If you'd like to know more about his ministry, Creation Ministries International, you can visit creation.com. So Dr. Sarfati, the floor is yours now. Thanks again for joining.
Well, thank you for inviting me to this great conference, and greetings to every panelist. I suppose I should tell you I don't come from America. I actually come from this country. But I do live in America now, and one reason is because of our granddaughters, so much easier to visit when they're in the same country as opposed to 9,000 miles across the ocean. Yeah, I am a retired chess master, sometimes playing chess from memory, like in this picture here. That's what I do. I'm here, and these are all the people I'm playing. This guy is telling me what they're doing, and I am making my moves for me. You can see the pictures, okay, guys? Have you?
Oh. No, actually.
You can't. Oh goodness. Okay, it's on my. Oh, do I need to hang on? I'm sorry. I've said a lot of stuff and.
No problem.
I'm gonna. Oh, I've got to do share screen, I suppose. Oh yeah. Hang on. Yeah. Sorry about that. How's this? Can you see now?
Yes, we do. Thank you.
Great. So sorry about the problems there. So one of my favorite topics to talk about is the amazing designs in living creatures, and often the best design is even in the tiny living cells. I just want to show you one very famous atheist, Richard Dawkins, who says that biology is the study of complicated things that give the appearance of having been designed for a purpose. And I think, of course, that's because they were designed for a purpose. And just you've seen this verse already in this conference about how people like Darwin and Dawkins have no excuse because the amazing design should be plain to them. And I think we can see it for ourselves. We make things ourselves, like this aeroplane, but how do you know an aeroplane was designed? Well, for one thing, it has loads of correct components. But do you realize, of course, an aeroplane is made totally of non-flying parts? So how do I get back to Australia? Well, the answer is they're organized correctly. And organization requires an organizer. Now, the alternative is the fear is an evolutionary idea, materialism, and evolution at base says matter plus time plus energy gives you organization. So I'm going to test this out with an aeroplane. So I'm supposing we make the aeroplane because we have matter in the form of a junkyard of aeroplane parts. We have a tornado providing energy. You have as much time as you want, and you get an aeroplane out of it. But how likely is this? Not terribly likely, I bet. But what if I told you this picture was a tornado hitting an aeroplane, turning it into a junkyard? much more likely. Now, the reason for this is there are many more ways of being a junkyard than being an aeroplane. So when you have time and you have energy, you go to the more probable state, which is a junkyard. I mean, you parents in the audience know this. How many of you have to tell your kids to mess up their rooms? Not many, because once again, there are many more ways of being messy than being tidy. Now, when you compare living things are much more complex because they can make copies of themselves. An airplane doesn't make a baby jet. So it's not self-copying. The Boeing factory makes jet planes, but it doesn't make you a new factory. It's not self-copying, but every living thing is self-copying. Your children are sort of copies of you. Your body's made up of trillions of cells, and those cells can copy themselves. That's how your body grows and repairs it. So any living thing is frightfully more complex than any man-made machine because it can copy itself. And when you look at some of the amazing things in living cells, I think you see why it's impossible that this could have come about by random chemicals in a primordial soup. I'm going to show you some of the amazing machinery we have. And one of the favorite ones I like, and also Dr. Thomas has written an article on this one too, is the energy currency of life. It's this chemical called ATP. Now, if you're not a chemistry nerd, don't worry about it. But I'll tell you that your body makes its own weight in this stuff every day and consumes it. And cyanide kills you by stopping this being made. And this is made by the tiniest motor in the universe. Every living thing has to have one of these. See if this will work. Now, I've got a whole talk that's just about machine. Now, did you hear that okay? I'm just to make sure you're hearing it okay. You hear it all right?
No, we didn't actually
Oh,
hear
I'm
it.
sorry. I can't always hear
No.
what you hear. I'm really sorry about that. I'll try to.
You have to share it. Click share, and when you click share screen, you're gonna see an option at the bottom where you can optimize for video sound.
Oh
And when
my.
you do that, yeah, then you will hear the sound.
You can't. You can tell I'm not used to Zoom meetings, can't you?
No, that's
Okay.
okay. I made that mistake as well. After a while I learned that, it's very specific.
Well, I can tell you what's going on here if you want. Just that. Okay. Can you see it all right?
Yes, maybe what you could do is click where it says stop sharing, and then you reshare, and then you look at when you see a window come up, so you can stop sharing. Then you press share screen again, and then you click on that. But at the bottom left-hand corner of the screen, you'd see share sound and a checkbox. You just
very good. Okay, I'm sorry about that.
Great, no problem. That happens to me as well. Yeah, that's fine.
You're too kind. Because it really is one of my favorite examples of design. But sorry, you didn't hear any of it. I'll see what I can do. Let's hang on.
Great, we're hearing.
Ah, good. Sorry about that. Oops, let's try it again. I'm sorry, really sorry. Okay, let's see what I can do. Learning a lot from you guys.
This animated sequence shows the ATP synthase enzyme in operation. The animation is based on an incredible series of scientific discoveries. Only the colors show artistic license. ATP, or adenosine triphosphate, is the energy currency of the cell. ATP is produced by a tiny molecular rotary motor, rotating at up to 7,000 RPM. These are so small that 100,000 would fit side by side in a millimeter. A current of protons drives the motor, unlike man-made electric motors which use electrons. This portion of the enzyme is where adenosine diphosphate is combined with a phosphate ion in the presence of a catalyst to produce ATP, which is then released, making way for the next cycle. A top view of the enzyme shows the sequential operation. Almost every biochemical process in your body requires ATP. Such a nanomachine exhibits all the characteristics of super-intelligent design. ATP is vital for life, and many of these motors were needed before the first living cell could exist. An evolutionary impossibility.
So I hope you got that. That's one of my favorite examples of the amazing designs in living creatures. But you see, going back to the airplane, it's not just a matter of the machinery, but also, so think about if you found the factory instruction manual to build the machine, then you'd know there was a designer for this machine, finding the instruction manual. And this is exactly what we have in living things. We have the instruction manual for life, the famous DNA molecule, which stands for definitely no accident, which actually stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. Oh, recording stopped. What's happening here? Oh, good, okay. So this stores the instructions for living things. Now, even the simplest living thing has about 600 kilobytes of information, but it must be incredibly compressed information, because to try to model what happens when this cell divides in two and it makes a copy, it took over 100 computers running for 8 to 9 hours. So the data compression must be astonishing. Now, with humans, we have about 1,000 Bible-sized books of information, about 3 gigabytes worth of information in each of our trillions of cells. But the thing is, information does not come from the ink. See, this sort of thing is impossible. The information came from a mind outside the ink, which arranged them into letters and words and sentences and paragraphs. In exactly the same way, the information in the DNA does not come from the chemistry of the DNA. It comes from a mind outside the chemistry. The information rides on the DNA chemistry, but doesn't come from it any more than the information in a book comes from the paper and the ink. And we also have to translate this into something meaningful. Like, my books aren't any use to you unless you know English. I mean, for instance, if I gave you a gift, you'd be happy, right? Because it means something you get for free. But in German, the word gift means poison. So a German friend of mine told me when he first came to New Zealand, he was appalled by our Christmas customs because we tried to poison our families. But of course, it's because he got the wrong language, that he got it all wrong. And in the same way, there's actually loads of translating machines to make sure that the DNA code is coded into the right proteins that make us who we are. If I've got time, I can show you this protein synthesis. It shows you exactly the amazing machines that are required to decode. And this is a simple version.
This animation demonstrates how the digital information encoded within DNA is used to direct protein synthesis. This is a DNA double helix containing the digital code which directs the cell in all aspects of operation. And here we see a protein complex called an RNA polymerase traveling down the DNA strand. As it moves down the strand, it carefully unwinds the DNA, preparing it for transcription. Inside the polymerase, we see a single-stranded copy of the original instructions being assembled as individual bases are positioned and added to the growing strand. A stop code marks the end of the protein specification, at which point this copy, known as a messenger RNA transcript, exits the polymerase and heads towards a two-part chemical manufacturing machine called the ribosome. While the messenger RNA moves towards the ribosome, transfer RNA molecules attach to specific amino acids in preparation for assembly. As the messenger RNA transcript passes through the ribosome, the process of translation begins. Using the instructions encoded on the messenger RNA as a template, the transfer RNA molecules align specific sequences of bases to corresponding amino acids, creating. As this chain exits the ribosome, it is met by chaperones which prevent premature folding, while escorting the protein to a barrel-shaped machine called a chaperonin. This machine helps fold the protein into the precise shape required to perform its function. Although it is unclear how the chaperonin achieves this, we do know that accurate folding is essential in order for the protein to accomplish its intended function. Once the protein is complete, it is released into the cytoplasm to do its job.
Now, this all has to be present before life can exist. And I'll also be one to quote Paul Davies, who said that most of the workings of a cell are best described not in terms of material stuff, hardware, but as information or software. And he asked, how did stupid atoms spontaneously write their own software? Nobody knows. And by the way, natural selection can't do anything because natural selection requires reproduction. It says that thing A is fitter than thing B, therefore thing A is going to leave more offspring. So you have to have reproduction before you have natural selection. So natural selection can't explain the origin of the first living cell with all this amazing machinery. So much more I could talk about. I've got a whole talk just about machines and living things, but I better stop now. So there's time for some questions. I shall stop sharing this now. And I'll go hand back to the boss here.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sarfati. I really, really learned a lot from what you've presented. You've been so much that you could cover. So I do have some of questions of my own. We are now in the second question and answer segment. Mm-hmm. So I'll just leave. All right, my first question is, creation science and intelligent design have often been labeled as a conspiracy theory and disinformation. What convinced you as a PhD scientist to hold to creation science?
Well, it's interesting when I'm going through the science course, there's so many things I was learning that were contrary to the evolutionary story. Right in first year geology, the head of paleontology said the fossil record does not support Darwinian evolution. He said it seems to support a series of divine creations. And then he has tried to assure us that he still believes in Darwin and isn't a divine creationist. But it's interesting, he had to explain away the evidence as opposed to going by the evidence. And in my own field of chemistry, all the reactions I was learning go in the opposite direction of what would be required for life to come from non-living chemicals. So for instance, any chemist who's trying to make a protein from amino acids, the last thing he wants is water, because water would tend to push the reactions the other way. And yet they told me that life began in a primordial ocean, and oceans usually have water in them. So not the right case for origin of life. So there are a lot of other different chemical things. Those are certain things that hit me anyway.
All right, thank you so much for that, Dr. Sarfati. We do have a question here. Dr. Sarfati, a 2019 Nature.com article reported that a team of scientists at Yale University revived the disembodied brains of pigs 4 hours after death, and the team stopped short of restoring consciousness because they used chemicals to block neurons from firing, while researchers at University of California, San Diego reported that, quote, mini brains grown in a dish had spontaneously produced human-like brain waves for the first time, similar to those seen in premature babies. Is consciousness, especially human consciousness, simply a result of neurons firing? Would this have implications for the biblical doctrine of the conscious human soul that survives the decay of the body and its brain tissue?
Well, I'm not an expert in this sort of area, I will admit, but my understanding that is that consciousness is something which is very hard to explain under an evolutionary assumption. And in fact, what a consciousness would be an illusion as far as the atheistic evolution is concerned. It's just an illusion produced by the firing of neurons in our brains. I mean, they don't really have a good explanation for consciousness. So I think the evidence still shows there is something, there's matter and there's mind and brain are not the same thing. So I think there's nothing in science that says that a mind can't survive the bodily death of the brain.
Okay, that's a very good answer. So, all right, my next question is, atheists such as Richard Dawkins contend that there are features in the human body that point to so-called bad design. How would you respond to the argument about bad design? For example, the retina, we have images upside down at the retina, and some persons don't understand, is this functional? Is this something that actually has a purpose? Or is this a mistake, for example?
Well, see, Dawkins has dined out in the idea, but somehow the retina is wired backwards at the way the nerves go in front of the retina instead of behind. And he's been saying for 30 years, bad design. But modern science has shown that he doesn't know what he's talking about. I mean, ophthalmologists have known for a long time that you have to have the nerves in front because you've got to have room for the blood to go behind, because you can't have blood vessels in front of the retina too much because it would block out your light. So you have to have a blood supply because the retina is a very active, biochemically active, so very rich blood supply to the retina. But also they've found that they've got what's called Mueller cells, which act as a fiber octave plate, which guides the light from the surface to the neurons. So in fact, it's a very good design the way it is. And in fact, they've even called it an optimal structure for producing sharper images. The so-called backward design produces sharper images and also optimizes for color as well, because it actually actually diverts the blue light to other cells which don't need the high energy photons. It really produces sharper images. It gets rid of stray light, and overall, Dawkins really got egg on his face by not knowing about the Mueller cells or the blood supply issue. He really is ignorant of this sort of issue. I've written a whole book on Dawkins called The Greatest Hoax on Earth. You can get it from creation.com too.
Thank you so much for that. My next question is, some contend that the organs of the body or some organs of the body are useless. For example, the appendix. Others say a large proportion of our DNA does not serve a function. Are these true? And if so, does this point to randomness? If God exists and is really all intelligent, why would he make useless things?
Well, okay, first of all, we believe in a creation plus fall. So it's possible that when God created things and they've been going downhill. What I'd like to see, if evolution requires things to go uphill, we should be seeing what's called nascent organs that are getting better. Something which actually is getting worse is compatible with the creation fall model. But I'm not convinced that we have too many of those examples, because things like the appendix, we now know there isn't a very important organ, because what it does, it's a safe house for the good bacteria that everyone has inside them. We actually have about the same number of bacterial cells as human cells. Now, the thing is, if you have an intestinal infection and it gets cleared out, it's good to have the appendix there to store the good bacteria, so they can repopulate the large intestine again. So it's actually a very good functional organ. It also has some lymphatic tissue, so it's actually like a tonsil on the other end of the alimentary canal. It's indefensible to think the appendix is useless. We now know it's a very important organ. It's a very useful organ. We can do without it, but it's much better to have it if you can. And things like the junk DNA issue, well, that concept belongs in the junk pile, because we now know that over 90% of a DNA is being transcribed into RNA. It's doing something, even if it's not coding for proteins. It's definitely doing something, and it has an important regulatory role. And we've found there are other languages. In fact, DNA is not just like a book you can read in English. It's like a book you can read in English and German and backwards in every 10th letter. It's got multiple languages on the same set of DNA, and the so-called junk DNA is involved with all these other languages. In fact, it's been an anti-science, that both this useless organs and junk DNA are science stoppers. They've actually hindered research into finding out what these things do. If you dismiss it as junk, you don't do the research. It's an anti-science position to have.
Wow. I have several questions coming in the chat. I don't know if we'll be able to get through all of them, but let me ask. So can man make a virus, for example, the coronavirus?
Oh, I wouldn't be surprised if man can do it, but all that will prove is that intelligence is necessary to make these things. I mean, man, I think there have been artificial life. I've written an article on the Cynthia, which is an artificial bacterium, very much like the mycoplasma, but it took an incredible amount of intelligence to make this thing, because I mean, it's just so complicated. A lot of dead ends to start, and one thing goes wrong, the whole thing collapses. So only if you apply loads of intelligence will you be able to make even a virus.
Yeah, it reminds me of a cartoon that I saw, on Facebook, where the scientist is mixing his chemicals and saying, if I could just synthesize these chemicals, I would have proven that no intelligence was needed to create life. And yet he is synthesizing it. He is deliberately trying to do something. So what has he proven? Just quickly, what would you say to those who believe that starting out with a religious assumption brings bias into science? Isn't invoking God into science to bring in a conclusion before we test anything? Could you just comment on that briefly, please?
Well, I mean, who hasn't got a bias? I mean, you think that Richard Dawkins hasn't got a bias when he needs atheism as a crutch for his atheistic faith. And also the founders of science were Bible believers. They had a bias that the universe was orderly, and we could actually we were given dominion to investigate and find out how God is upholding things in a regular, repeatable way. Now, how do you get order in the universe from atheism? You can't go from there is no God to the universe is orderly. You can't make that connection logically. It becomes an article of faith. But as Christian, we can say we believe in a God of order, not the author of confusion, who is a divine lawmaker. And therefore, I expect to find order that we can discover.
All right. So as you said that, I remember a quote by Richard Lewontin from Georgia State University. It said that he made this admission, and I think he was really being truthful. Materialists cannot allow a divine foot in the door. Materialism rejects both the divine foot and, come to think of it, the door as well. There is, after all, no outside for a materialist. The cosmos is all that is, was, or ever shall be. So it is something that, basically we are being told that Christians are thinking in a box, but when you think of it, materialists are the ones that restrict themselves to only material explanations of what we see. Just finally, I remember being asked by a colleague, since I'm a Christian, why am I in science? Why would you say that more Christians are not involved in science?
Well, I mean, 200 years ago, Christians were the entire set of science. I mean, and actually very devout Christians. I mean, I think you mentioned Robert Boyle. He, in his will, he left funds to fund lectures defending Christianity, the Boyle lectures. Sir Isaac Newton, as you say, he was the greatest scientist of all time. He wrote more about science than the Bible. Einstein's three scientific heroes were Newton, Faraday, and Maxwell. And you'd probably call them fundamentalists if they were alive today. They were extremely devout and they believed the Bible fully. Maxwell rebuked someone for denying the global flood. Faraday was very much in a very conservative Christian sect called the Sandemanians, very devout. So the idea that somehow religion is opposed to science, well, Yeah, even in the Middle Ages, a lot of the clergy, people in good standing in the church, they were the ones who started the scientific enterprise.
Yeah, okay. Thank you so very much, Dr. Sarfati. And sorry for the participants who I didn't get to your questions. If anything, I can inbox you another time. We'll save the chat and we can do the connections. All right, right now, thanks again, Dr. Sarfati. Right now, we're going to be, we're going to be having a special announcement for you. So there is indeed a gap in the Christian voice in society in applied fields. Let me just get my screen up quickly. Right, so, okay, in the midst of this gap, Chosen to Glow Ministries has been trying to play its part. We work on 5 pillars: evangelism, education, outreach, advocacy, and research. Just this year alone in the research front, we actually presented as a civil society organization at the UN side event. We also were able to make a short statement at EU Parliament. We've led a public education campaign featuring world-renowned experts on pro-life issues, including Dr. Alveda King, as you see on the screen. We've also, by God's grace, led efforts in resulting in around a dozen new Caribbean NGO signatories on a pro-life international document. And we've also been involved in pro-family and pro-traditional pro-life advocacy at Jamaica's Foreign Affairs Ministry, collaborating with other groups which are also here today. But is still a far way to go. We need your hands, your voices, and your intellect. So I'm going to be introducing to you Campus Changers, which is a free mentorship program which we are planning to embark, God willing, in next year, God willing. And we plan to connect Christian youths in colleges and university campuses across Jamaica with Christian mentors, both in Jamaica and around the world from various fields of studies. So we know that you have different fields of study here represented in this meeting today, and we need your skills to make an impact for God. So I'm going to be launching a poll right now. You should see it on the screen. So if you would like to learn more about techniques on how to confidently respond to questions about the Christian faith, if you would like opportunities to learn about how to apply your skill set to positively impact society for Christ, if you desire to be part of a community of believers who are excited to impact youths and policy with their talents to God's glory, and if you feel called to serve and amplify the voice of the Christian faith in society, we invite you to sign up for more information on the Campus Changers initiative. So who do we need? We need Christian youth that are ready to be mentored. I have here just some of the ideas that we have. We also need mentors. It can just be a one-time speaker on a relevant theme, and we also invite persons to be resident mentors as well. So you want to have working groups of persons in different fields of expertise, whether you're in social sciences, natural sciences, because we want more youths especially to publish in Christian relevant and policy relevant issues that are especially relevant to the local space in Jamaica and the Caribbean. We also need a volunteer support team. We need social media assistants, graphic design coordinators, content creators, educators, any skill that you have. If you have any heart to just use some of your time to help us and want to be trained in both apologetics and how to apply your field for God in ministry, we invite you to just join us. So you can submit this on the screen. And it's not restricted to those who are presently in university or college. You can be a preacher if you want to give of your time to just speak on a relevant topic to mentor youth. We invite you to consider signing up. So in the next few months, God willing, we'll be in touch with you. We might have to have some interviews, especially for the mentors, but we encourage you to join us. All right, so if you have any questions, feel free to inbox me before the session is over. But in the interest of time, let's go on to our next esteemed speaker, Mr. J. Seegert from the Starting Point Project. J. Seegert is a keynote speaker for 35 years and is the managing director for Starting Point Project at the startingpointproject.com. Mr. Seegert is an international speaker and author. and holds degrees in both physics and engineering technology from the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater and John Brown University, respectively. Mr. Seegert serves on the board of directors for Logos Research Associates and is a speaker for the Creation Science Association of Fiji. Mr. Seegert has also served as representative speaker for Ratio Christi. He is a former adjunct speaker for Creation Ministries International and former president for Creation Science Society of Milwaukee. Mr. Seegert is married for 28 years to his wife, Amy, and has 2 married children, Taylor and Tori. So you can learn more about Mr. Seegert's ministry at thestartingpointproject.com. And Mr. Seegert, the floor is yours. Thanks again for taking the time to join us.
You're welcome. It's an honor to be here. I know we have a short period of time, so I'm not going to do much more about my background other than to say that I grew up in a Christian home, believed everything about the Bible cover to cover, went to a Christian college for engineering, and then I went to the State University for physics. And when I got there, all my professors were telling me I was wrong about everything that I believed. And that made me feel very uncomfortable to be surrounded by those professors who I had assumed had a lot of evidence for what they believed, but I realized for the first time in my life that even though I knew what I believed, I did not know why. So God put it on my heart to start researching. So I've been researching and speaking for 36 years now, and went into full-time ministry about 15 years ago, traveling around the country, United States and around the world, been in 8 other countries, but haven't been to Jamaica yet speaking. So that's a hint, wink, wink. But I want to get right into my talk. I'm going to share my screen and show you some of the PowerPoint here. So we should have it up. You should be seeing the screen says scientific foreknowledge in the Bible. We're going to be talking about the question of how do we know that God really wrote this book that we think is inspired by him. And as I travel around, I ask Christians a question. I ask them, why are you a Christian? And they'll often say, well, because I believe the Bible. Okay, why do you believe the Bible? Well, because I'm a Christian. And then round and round, well, why are you a Christian? Because I believe the Bible. Why do you believe the Bible? Because I'm a Christian. Well, if we don't go any further than that, we just really have a blind faith, and we need to come up with better answers than that. There's no shortage of religious books out there. Here's just a small sampling. How do we know which of these are the inspired word of God? Maybe they all are. Maybe none of them are. Maybe just 2. How would you know which 2? Well, not too long ago, there was a debate not far from where I live between an atheist and a Christian, and the topic was, would the world be better off without religion? A friend of mine asked me to go to the debate, and I said, yeah, I'll go with you, but I would never be part of that debate. He said, why not? I said, because I'm not a religious person. He said, what are you talking about? You travel around the world talking about, God and the Bible and creation and Jesus and all those things. I said, well, here's why I say that. I think that religion is man's idea of God. The reason we have so many different religions is we have so many different people, and they all have their own idea of who God is, what he is, why we're here, and what happens to us when we die. On the other hand, I think the Bible is God's idea about God. And so while I say I'm not a religious person, I am a Christian, and I believe the Bible from cover to cover. Now, I realize that Christianity is considered one of the world's religions. So in that sense, I guess I would be a religious person, but I like to make the distinction between man's idea of God and God's idea of God, which makes it even more important for us to understand how do we know the Bible is really God's idea about himself. Some of you may have an autographed book at home. It's kind of neat. You can show your friends that you met the author and they signed the book for you. Wouldn't it be cool to have an autographed copy of the Bible? Kind of makes your head spin. I think we do. I think God's signature is all over his word. But how would we know the Bible is really from God? Well, there are at least 4 basic tests you can apply to any religious writing to see if it shows evidence of being inspired by God. First of all, internal consistency. Does the book you're looking at, whatever it is, does it contradict itself? If it does, that's good evidence God did not write that. He wouldn't contradict himself. Historical accuracy. If the book you're looking at gets history wrong, good evidence God did not write that. Prophetic accuracy. If the book you're looking at makes predictions about the future and they've been proven false, great evidence God did not write that. And then lastly, scientific accuracy. If the book you're looking at actually makes statements that can be directly tested by science and it's been proven false, and that might be pretty good evidence God didn't write that, because God would know science as well. With the short period of time we have here, we're just going to focus on that last one, which we also call scientific foreknowledge. And here's the point. Bible was written a long time ago. Old Testament roughly 1500 to 400 BC. The New Testament roughly from 40 to 100 AD. That's long before we had microscopes and telescopes. Yet there are things in the Bible that scientists today are discovering, and they're saying, wow, those guys were right. But how could they possibly have known that back then? Well, on their own, they could not have known those things. This is evidence God was telling them what to write. And the truth has been mentioned before. Most major areas of science that we have today were founded by Bible-believing Christians. I brought a few along if you'd like to see some. Antiseptic surgery, bacteriology, calculus, chemistry, computer science, electronics, electrodynamics, electromagnetics, fluid mechanics, galactic astronomy, gas dynamics, genetics, hydraulics, hydrostatics, oceanography, optical mineralogy, paleontology, pathology, physical astronomy, stratigraphy, thermodynamics, thermokinetics, vertebrate paleontology, and a scientific method, all founded by Bible-believing Christians. But then people say, yeah, but the Bible's not a science textbook. And I would completely agree with that. The Bible is not a science textbook, and I'm glad it's not, because then it would be hard to understand. Fewer people would read it, and more importantly, it would have to be updated and corrected like science textbooks. But even though the Bible is God's first shot at writing a book, I think he did a pretty good job, and it does not need updating or correcting. It's true from cover to cover throughout time. But what the Bible does for us is it provides a framework to properly understand science, because facts don't speak for themselves. They need to be interpreted. And the way you interpret facts is by using a framework, a worldview, a starting point. Now, we're the Starting Point Project. Everyone has a starting point, and you use that to interpret everything else. And the Bible provides an awesome, in fact, it's the only accurate framework to understand science. So very quickly in the time we have, the Bible does talk about astronomy. Jeremiah 33:22. As a host of heaven cannot be numbered, neither the sand of the sea measured, so I will multiply the seed of David, my servant. Jeremiah, writing over 2,500 years ago, said that the stars are uncountable. That made no sense to him when he said that, because he could look up at the night sky and see pretty much the same stars we see, which is about 3,000 with the naked eye. Why would Jeremiah look at 3,000 stars and say they're uncountable? Well, modern astronomers tell us there's, 10 trillion stars out there. That's just a ballpark guess. It's an uncountable number, just like Jeremiah said, writing over 2,000 years ago when he didn't have a telescope. Well, today we have telescopes. We have the Hubble telescope. And it's very interesting. There's something called the Hubble Deep Field. Astronomers wonder about the universe. They wonder, is it pretty much the same everywhere we look? Or are there areas that are empty and other areas that are just filled with stars and galaxies and all that? So they took the Hubble telescope and focused it on one small part of the sky. It was 1/24 millionth of the whole thing. It looked kind of dark. So they leave the aperture open for a number of days to see if anything develops. This is what developed in that small spot. 3,000 stars. But guess what? Those weren't stars. Those are galaxies. And each one of those galaxies has probably 100 billion stars in it. Then they have the Hubble Extreme Deep Field. This is only 1/32 millionth of the night sky. And they discovered 5,500 galaxies, each of which has probably 100 billion stars. More recently, they have the Hubble Legacy Field. They discovered 265,000 galaxies. Absolutely amazing. Are the stars uncountable? Yep, just like Jeremiah said. The Bible gives us a framework for understanding geology. I wish I had more time for this. Genesis 6-8 talks about a worldwide flood. It is an absolute fact that there are many layers in the earth. An atheist can see that. A Christian can see that. We know they are there. How they got there, that's a different story, because the atheist was not there to see them being deposited. The Christian was not there to see them being deposited. But the Bible gives us an eyewitness account from God saying there was a worldwide flood. And if there really was a worldwide flood, we would expect to see these sedimentary layers lay down all over the planet filled with fossils. And that's exactly what we see. There's much more that we could say, but I got to keep moving a little bit. I actually lead tours to the Grand Canyon. We spend one day walking on the south rim there, looking 1 mile down to the Colorado River. Then the next day, we're actually on the Colorado River going around the famous Horseshoe Bend. And all along the way, we give many scientific lectures showing evidence of the worldwide flood that's depicted in Genesis 6-8. Afterwards, we also see some really cool dinosaur footprints. So if you're ever here in the States, let us know and we can have you join one of our Grand Canyon tours. But the Bible also gives us a framework to properly understand biology. Genesis 1:24, God said, let the land produce creatures according to their kinds. 10 times in Genesis chapter 1, God says he created creatures to reproduce after their kind. And that's what we see today. Today, dogs, dingoes, coyotes, and wolves can all breed together. And when you breed them together, you get something that looks like what they are. They're very similar creatures. They're the same kind of creature. You can breed a dog and a wolf, and you get a wolf dog. That's no surprise. That's what we expect in biology, and that's what the Bible would predict. But you cannot breed a dog and a wolf and get an ostrich. That's not going to happen. They don't have genetic information to make beaks and feathers. So can you get a variety? Yes, wonderful variety, but always within distinct limits. That's what the Bible predicts. That's what we see in biology today. Leviticus 17:11, for the life of the flesh is in the blood. Blood is very, very important for life. Each human red blood cell contains about 270 million molecules of hemoglobin that carries oxygen throughout your body. If you had a slight amount less, you would be dead. What's interesting about that is doctors used to drain blood out of people's bodies when they got sick. That's largely how George Washington, our first president, died. He got pneumonia. They drained some blood. He got sicker. They drained more blood. He got sicker. He ended up dying because they drained almost a gallon of blood out of his body. If they would have taken the Bible seriously, they would have never done that. And doctors today know better. They don't do that anymore. Blood is very, very important. Then Exodus 15:26. Moses wrote, if thou wilt diligently hearken to the voice of the Lord thy God, I will put none of these diseases upon thee. What's going on here? All right, God creates everything to begin with, and it's perfect. Adam and Eve are perfect. They sin, disobey God, and they get kicked out of the garden. God could have just smashed them and started over. But he said, no, I love them too much. I got a plan. I'm going to send my own son to die on a cross to pay for the sins of the world. And the entire Old Testament is God playing out that plan, which included God choosing a group of people through which his son, the Messiah, would be born. Those were the Hebrew people. They become the Israelites and the Jews. The entire Old Testament is also Satan, who hates God, trying to ruin God's plan. So the entire Old Testament is Satan trying to wipe out the Jews, because if he can, the Messiah can't come. And God is also trying to protect his people. In this passage, Moses is saying, listen to what God is telling us about these health practices, and we won't see the diseases that we're observing in the nations around us. But we know from the book of Acts that Moses was educated in all the wisdom of the Egyptians. Today, if someone goes to a state university, they get a PhD, and then they write some books, you would expect that the information in those books would have come from what they learned at the university. That's just kind of how it works. Well, Moses goes to the Egyptian university, learns everything, and then he writes 5 books. Yeah, the first 5 books of the Bible. So do we see Egyptian wisdom in the Bible? We should, if Moses just made it up on his own, and that's what the skeptics claim. Well, here's an example of Egyptian wisdom. This is the Ebers Papyrus, written about 1550 BC, contains over 800 magical formulas and remedies for things. They say if you got a splinter, you're supposed to apply worm blood and donkey dung. Modern scientists say, yikes, you don't want to do that. It causes tetanus spores, you can get lockjaw, you can get very sick, you could even die. That's the kind of stuff Moses was educated in. So do we see things like that in the Bible? We should, if Moses made it up on his own. Here's a fascinating example of what we actually see written by Moses. Moses talked about touching a dead body. Today we know about bacteria and germ theory. You don't want to touch a dead animal. You could get very sick from that. This is what Moses wrote in the book of Numbers, chapter 19. Whoever touches a dead body of anyone will be unclean for 7 days. He must purify himself in the water purification on the 3rd day and on the 7th day, and then he'll be clean. Okay, what's this water purification? A few verses earlier, he tells us. He said the priest is to take some cedar wood, hyssop, scarlet wool, and throw them on the burning heifer or cow. That sounds bizarre. A bunch of random stuff thrown together. Modern scientists say that's not bizarre at all. That's really fascinating, and here's why. The cedar wood and the burning ashes of that heifer or cow combine to make lye. That's a caustic soda. That's what we call soap. You touch a dead body, washing with soap would be a good thing. The hyssop plant converts into thiamol. It's isopropyl alcohol. It kills bacteria. You touch a dead body, killing bacteria would come in handy. The scarlet wool forms a gritty substance, can be abrasive, just like something we have called orange goop. It has pumice in it that helps cleanse the stuff. Applying it on the 3rd and the 7th day, bacteria grow very well in a damp environment. So you want to wait a few days for it to dry out, and then you apply this. You wait a few more days, apply it again, and you're considered clean. Modern scientists they say that's an amazing natural remedy if you don't have antibiotics. Did Moses know anything about bacteria and germ theory and isopropyl alcohol? Obviously not. This is evidence that God said, Moses, write this down, and he wrote it down. My last example, Moses wrote about a Jewish tradition in Genesis 17:12. For the generations to come, every male among you who is 8 days old must be circumcised. Why did Moses say the 8th day? He could have said anything. Could have said the 3rd month, the 5th year. He said the 8th day. Modern scientists have discovered some pretty fascinating things about blood clotting. There are many things that are required. I'm just going to mention 2 here. Vitamin K and prothrombin. You don't have those 2 things, you could get a small cut and bleed to death. Modern scientists have discovered vitamin K develops in a baby somewhere between days 5 and 7. That's when it starts to develop. Prothrombin, a little more complex, looks like this if we graph it. I will explain the graph. The line across the top is the normal level of prothrombin in your body. The numbers across the bottom are days after birth. Scientists discovered on day 1, a baby has about 90% of its prothrombin. That's pretty high. That's not bad. But then it drops dangerously low between days 2 and 5 to only 30%. That's not good at all. But on day 8, it spikes to 110% of its normal level. It will never be that high again the rest of your entire life. So if you are a baby and need a surgical procedure, day 8 would be the perfect day, because for sure you have vitamin K and you have more prothrombin than you'll ever have the rest of your life. Did Moses know anything about vitamin K and prothrombin? Obviously not. This is God saying, Moses, write it down, and he writes it down. So the Bible actually passes this test of scientific foreknowledge. In fact, it passes all 4 tests that I mentioned: the internal consistency and historical accuracy and prophetic accuracy and scientific accuracy. So do Christians have faith that the Bible is the inspired word of God? Yes, we do. But it's an incredibly reasonable faith backed up by so much evidence. In fact, if you want to believe the Bible is not the inspired word of God, you have a lot of explaining to do. And there's so much, we're just scratching the surface here. I have a 5-part video series called The Inspiration of the Bible, where I go into these examples and many, many more, because there's so much that could have been covered. So with that, I'm going to unshare my screen here in a second. Again, you can always ask us more questions at thestartingpointproject.com, but let me stop the share and go back for the Q&A session.
Thank you so much, Mr. Seegert. It's so amazing, very interesting how the Bible had these scientific facts before we discovered them in modern times. This is one of my favorite topics in apologetics. Personally, I was going to mention the 8th day thing, and I'm glad that you mentioned it, because to me, that is so amazing that of all the days in a child's life, in the human life, even if you live 100 years, that's the only day, the 8th day, that vitamin K and prothrombin are at the highest. And that was the day that God said, circumcise your son. And, I'm just saying, what are the odds for that to be a coincidence? So people do have a lot of explaining to do, as you said. So All right, my first logical question that I would ask, though, is how do we know that these writings were not lost knowledge? For example, from the ancient Egyptians, I think you did mention a bit about looking at the cultures and the differences in their beliefs, but how do we know it's not lost knowledge from the ancient Egyptians and Greeks that the Bible borrowed and we rediscovered in modern times? How do you know this is actually legitimately foreknowledge that human beings never knew anywhere?
Sure, that's a great question, and people might bring that up. My question to them is, okay, what is your evidence that it is lost knowledge? Because if it was lost knowledge and then Bible picked it up later, they might have an argument. But the point is, they do not have the historical evidence to say it is lost knowledge that then was re-picked up later by the Bible. So interesting story, but it's just a story with no evidence on their end. But we have a lot of evidence on our end that it was written by these authors who claim Moses and others wrote it when they said they wrote it, and it wasn't in the culture. In fact, when you do look at what was in the culture, it was going contrary to that, all the crazy things that are in a lot of these other Egyptian writings. So the Bible stands out, and even if they thought they refound those, I'd say, okay, let's put those aside, let's look at these other ones. There's so many more. So if they want to say, well, they just got lucky, I'd say, okay, let's say they got lucky with one, and then two, and then three, and then four. At some point, they'll have to say, okay, this is crazy. They could not have gotten that all right. 27% of the Bible is prophetic in nature. That's over 8,000 passages making all these predictions. If you want to say they got one or two right by accident, I'm okay with that, but not 100%. 100% accuracy, the track record the Bible has with prophecy.
Yeah, definitely. I also remember in my field, when I discovered that there was in the Bible about springs in the ocean, and then in textbooks it said it was actually discovered in the late 1970s. And yet in Job, I believe it was, God was saying, look at the springs, who discovered this, or who, look at the springs in the ocean. So the Bible was already saying the mechanism for the oceans to be maintained, there are springs underneath, and we didn't have the submarine technology at all, of course, in those days. So definitely the onus would be on persons who doubt to say, are you having faith that there is no evidence? That there's evidence. Are you having faith that it couldn't be somewhere else than saying that it was from God who revealed this? We do have a comment here. What are the odds of the Bible predicting Christ's death or resurrection by chance? I know that this is, well, not necessarily scientific foreknowledge, but prophecy in a direct way. But you can maybe make a short comment on that.
Sure, and prophecy is amazing. Prophecy is arguably the most powerful evidence for inspiration. I mean, to make predictions about the future. That's why you won't find any prophecy like in the Book of Mormon. You'll find it in some of their other writings, but not actually in the Book of Mormon, because it's too easy to be wrong. And how many false prophecies does it take to be a false prophet? Just one. And the Bible says in Deuteronomy 18, if someone claims to be speaking from God and what they say doesn't come true, they're to be put to death. And so when you look at prophecy, just the messianic prophecies that Jesus fulfilled, he fulfilled about 300 when you look at them in totality. And you can pare it down just to about 48. If you look at what are the chances that Jesus was not really the Messiah, he just coincidentally fulfilled the prophecies that were written in the Bible. And the math has been done on it. And there's one chance and a one followed by, I think it's like 19 or 21 zeros after that. And again, when you look at big numbers, they're not always that meaningful to us. So let's take a practical analogy quickly. Most people have played with a Rubik's Cube, little toy. There are 10 million trillion different combinations to a Rubik's Cube, and only one is correct. So if you were blindfolded and you were spinning the Rubik's Cube randomly, you'd have one chance in 10 million trillion of getting it right. No sane person says they could do that by accident. Okay, let's compare Jesus fulfilling just 48 of these prophecies to solving the Rubik's Cube. It would be like being blindfolded. Someone hands you the cube, you start spinning away, and you solve that cube 8 times in a row, getting it right every single time. And that's just 48 of those prophecies. So that kind of proves two things. Number one, that Jesus really is who he claimed to be. He is the Messiah, but it also verifies that the prophets who wrote those predictions must have been inspired by God, because they wouldn't have come true if they were making them up.
Wow, a very, very powerful analogy. So we have two people, their hands are up, and there's a question in the chat that's asking about how do we reconcile Dr. Hugh Ross's position of a localized flood with their position of a really global flood. I think maybe we will delay that question until our paleobiochemist comes on about the localized flood. So Frederick, if I forget, you just remind me. So I'll just allow Zachary and the other person whose hands are raised to quickly unmute and ask their questions. Then we go to the next speaker.
Night, everyone.
Good night.
Based on the evidence you have given and how, man trusts in the power of science, would you say then that science in itself is a religion to its own end, as it has a common denominator of worshiping something that you believe is a purpose, or at least by luck of chance how it is, and trusting in it for the results that you please it might have? So would it be considered religion in its own sense, where people who live by it only believe it and only put their faith in it, and don't see any other way based off of it?
A great question. I wouldn't personally say that science is a religion. People can maybe worship it religiously, but the biggest distinction we can make is that there's a big difference between operational science and historical science. When we're talking about operational science that makes cell phones and cures diseases, it's great stuff. We can see it in the laboratory. We can repeat it. Multiple people can come up with the same results. Creationists and evolutionists are typically not debating operational science. But when we're talking about historical science, that deals with events that happen in the unobserved past, like the origin of the universe or the origin of life. Those things involve a lot of guesses and assumptions. And different people, different scientists have different guesses and assumptions, not based on the facts that they're looking at. It's based on their worldview, their existing beliefs, their biases, their starting point. And so what they're doing is they're using like an atheistic starting point to say, well, however the universe got here, it must have been an accident because there is no God. Whereas a Christian would say, I believe to begin with that God exists. So when I look at this universe, I'm assuming it's a product of his creation, and I'm expecting to see order in it and consistency. And then when we study it, that's what we see. So it has to do with starting points. And you could look at historical science kind of in a religious way, like the Lewontin who said we cannot allow a divine foot in the door. Dr. Scott Todd said, even if all the data point to an intelligent designer, such an hypothesis is excluded from science because it's not naturalistic. So he's admitting, even if all the data point to a creator, a God, a designer, we're going to throw it out because we're not looking for those kind of answers. We're only looking for natural answers.
Right. Very good response. Oh, I see something from Daniel Shai. I think that has to be our final one for this Q&A, but you can quickly unmute yourself on Daniel.
Hi, Mr. Seegert. We hear a
Hi.
lot about scientific discoveries of dinosaurs, and they're dating back to billions of years ago. You touched on it a little, but we're told that this is incompatible with the creation story. Can you speak to that a bit?
Oh, Daniel, sorry. Before Mr. Seegert, our next speaker will actually be dealing with that directly. So I don't know if you wanted to delay that question. So I don't know.
I could be brief, but
Yes,
to
you
have
can be brief.
Brian he'll do an awesome job covering that. But what's interesting is, and he'll probably explain more, they don't even really date dinosaur bones directly. If a bone comes into the lab, they'll say, well, we can't date this, it's too old. It's like, wait a minute, you don't know the age yet. Why don't you date it? Well, they make assumptions. It must be 65 million years old. And then they don't even date the rock layer it was found in, because those are sedimentary layers and you can't use radiometric dating on that. So they typically will have like an igneous rock that was by the sedimentary layer where the bone was found, and then use multiple methods and come up with all different ages and pick the one that seems to be best suited for what they assumed it would be. But Dr. Thomas will go into a lot more detail on that. That's a really important question.
Yes, yes. Thank you so much, Mr. Seegert, for your presentation. It's one of my favorites, as I said. So thanks also for your time and effort put into your ministries. All right,
welcome.
so we'll be moving.
Sorry,
Yes.
James Stroud has his hand up.
Oh, James.
Oh, no, I was clapping, not a hand up. Sorry.
All right, no problem, no problem. All right, so before we introduce our next speaker, it's time again to have our next factoid very quickly. This one is by far one of my favorites, both because it's close to my personal field of study, but it also shows that the Bible can actually serve as a reliable theoretical basis for scientific discovery. So I'm introducing to you to Matthew Fontaine Mori, oceanographer. So Mr. Mori actually discovered sea and ocean currents. He was actually a devout Christian, and after reading Psalm 8, verse 8, which speaks about the paths of the seas, he was determined to find these paths that the psalm was speaking about. So Mori actually wrote the first textbook on modern oceanography, the physical geography of the sea and its meteorology. In this work, Mori presented oceanography from a delightfully Christian view, and he included biblical passages of meteorological and other scientific importance, such as scripture quoted from the book of Job 28, verse 25, which refers to God's making the weight for the winds. So if you didn't know that, now you've learned it here. All right, so our next speaker is much like Mr. Mori and will speak with us about fossils. So Dr. Brian Thomas, he received his bachelor's degree in biology in 1993, a master's in biotechnology in 1999 from Stephen Austin State University, Texas, and a PhD in paleobiochemistry in 2019 from the University of Liverpool. He taught junior high and high school at Christian schools in Texas, as well as biology, chemistry, and anatomy as an adjunct and assistant professor at the Dallas area universities. Since 2008, Mr. Thomas has been a science writer and editor at the Institute for Creation Research, which he contributes news and magazine articles, speaks on creation issues, and researches original tissue fossils. He's the author of Dinosaurs and the Bible and a contributor to Guide to Creation Basics and Beyond, Guide to Dinosaurs, and Guide to the Human Body. So you can find more about him at the Institute for Creation Research, and you can just search for Dr. Brian Thomas. So the floor is yours, Dr. Thomas. Thanks again for taking the time to join us.
You're muted, brother Brian. You're muted.
Okay, now can you hear me? Can you see my slides?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks. Just wanted to open with a quick, I guess, context. You know, I believed what I was told when I was young. I was told that I evolved from an ape or an ape-like ancestor, and that ape evolved over millions of years from some sort of other creature that evolved itself from a fish. And so, you know, if you talk to my professors, who I learned from as though they were, you know, authoritative guides to life in history, they told me, you know, you're just a really specialized fish. And it didn't make a lot of sense, but I thought, hey, these are the scientists, they have the truth, so I better just believe what they say. And so that was my origin. And when I got to college, I was interrupted by some people who just lived differently, and they loved one another. And boy, they were out on the campus, the college campus where I was attending university, Stephen F. Austin State in East Texas. And they were walking around and they said, hey, what are you doing? They were walking around at night and I was on my skateboard. And I said, well, I'm skateboarding. And and they started asking me about what I believed. And well, what do you believe about Christianity, about the Bible? And I thought, well, you know, I don't think that it's totally true. Maybe there's parts of the Bible that are true, but there's other parts that can't be true because science has proved it wrong. And that's what I said. That's what I thought. And so then the leader of this group, who is still a good friend of mine today, almost 30 years later, he said, well, what science has proved it wrong? And I said, well, the parts of the parts of science that say that fossils are millions of years old. That's not in the Bible. And so we talked all night long. And then the next night, I met him again. I went to his apartment and I said, it's not that you have the answers, although your answers cleared away all my objections. But I think you have the truth because you cared about me. And so I'm interested in what you have. So I asked him this silly question, what's all this Jesus junk anyways? So I asked him, what's the Jesus junk? And he said, well, we've found that science is not as scientific as we thought it was. And he challenged me. He said, show me, because you're a science major, Brian, and I was, and I got a degree in biology and then more degrees. And he said, show me the science that proves that these fossils are millions of years old. And so I tried to investigate that. And the more I dug into the details, the less scientific I found the quote unquote science was that supported the view that I was taught and told that I came from fish. So instead, I began to read the Bible, and I began to look again at the book of Genesis. And the more I learned about the real fossils and the real rock layers, the better Genesis sounded, the more accurate Genesis sounded to me. So I'm privileged to share just 3 features that fortify my faith that I have grown to believe in the flood. And when I say faith in the flood, I mean that God flooded the world like he said he did, when he said he did, how he said he did, there in the book of Genesis. So this is the Genesis flood that flooded the whole world. And Noah and his 3 sons and their wives survived it. They brought the animals on the ark. And that's what the Bible teaches. Now, if that is true, then all the New Testament authors, including the Lord Jesus himself, who referred to Noah as a real person, then whatever they say makes sense. I can trust what they say because they leaned on the flood as a historical fact. And so 3 fossil features fortify that as being real. The first one has to do with burial. And so what would we expect with the flood, the worldwide, world-destroying, world-covering, catastrophic flood? What would we expect to see in the real ground? And boy, the more I look at what's in the real ground, the more I see evidence of this flood. So here's one of our digs I did in Montana. And you can see I'm holding a dinosaur bone there, but it's right next to a turtle bone on the bottom left, turtle leg, top left. We have a fossil fig, bottom right. And so how do I get turtles, dinosaurs, and figs? And there's even some shark teeth buried in there. Shark teeth with dinosaurs and figs? That does not happen today anywhere at all. And then I look at the rock layer and you can see this. I don't know, can you see my mouse? Does my mouse show up if I do this?
Yes, your mouse shows, but Dr. Thomas, if you can speak up a bit louder, it's a bit difficult to hear. I don't know if you're
okay. What if I hold my microphone? Does that help?
Slightly.
Slightly, okay. What if I speak louder? Does that help any?
Yes, it helps.
Okay.
All right, thank you so much.
Sorry about that. Well, this rock layer, this sandstone is very loose sand. But here's the thing. It extends from Montana, all across all of Montana and Wyoming. I mean, this is thousands of square miles of the same rock with the same kinds of fossils in it, the same features, the same grain size, the same color, the same attributes, extending for thousands of square miles. That does not happen today. So what would we expect the flood to do? Massive burial. So my first clue or fossil feature is this widespread burial, but it's a catastrophic burial. This mud was moving fast. So here I am at the Field Museum in Chicago. And there's a replica of the most famous fossil probably in the world, and it's the Tyrannosaurus Rex, nicknamed Sue. So there's Sue, the T-Rex. And how do you bury a creature like that? It's almost 7 tons, and it's like a living bulldozer. It could go wherever it wants to go. And I'm wondering, how do you bury that? And so that doesn't get buried today. Big creatures that die today, they get scavenged. They don't turn into fossils. But there's more details about this. So let me just, how do I back up? Now, do you see this upper deck? There's Sue was on display down in the lobby, but there's an upper deck here that has more details. So I went to the upper deck, and here's what I found. Here's Sue, the replica, where its nose is straightened out, and then here's Sue, the real Sue fossil, where its nose has been smushed, and the nose right here, the nose brit has been crushed. And so here is 2 people, and they are looking at Sue's head, which is displayed in a glass box, so we can worship it, examine it. And so and these people are looking at some sign, and the sign says something, and they're looking at it with a straight face. So I'm wondering, what are they looking at? And what does this say about why this fossil head, big as it was, got smashed? And here's the sign. It says crushed nose. When Sue was found, well, we don't know if it's a she, just nicknamed after the discoverer, who's named Sue Hendrickson. Anyway, its pelvis was resting on top of her snout. Now your pelvis, that's your hips. So it's upside down and it's crushed. So that may sound odd, says the sign. And I say, yes, it does sound odd. But discovering a theropod dinosaur in this death pose is really common. Well, if it's odd in one place and you find it's odd in a lot of places, that makes it that much more odd. It's so it is odd. And why is this? And it says this death pose may be caused by muscle spasms. And I thought, you talk about reaching for straw, grasping for straws, trying to tell any story that does not have massive watery catastrophe with lots and lots of mud. So when I saw this, I started to laugh, and I laughed really hard. And those 2 people who were on the other side of the display, they just started backing up, and they walked away. That's the effect I have on folks. I just make them walk away. But how could they read this with a straight face? Muscle spasms. That's going to break your nose by having your hip smash on top of your nose. This is just a silly story. So anyway, that gives me confidence. This was a catastrophe, massive catastrophe. There's your hip on top of your nose. It's typical death pose, sure enough. Your hip on top of your skull, breaking your nose in some cases. This is a catastrophic burial. So we see this burial, this death pose, necks arched back as though these animals were choking. You know what? Maybe they were choking because of all the mud that was covering them. And here's another small dinosaur, the Compsognathus dinosaur, choking on mud, and its body is folded in half. So the burials that we see are not regular, they're not everyday processes. Something weird, something massive happened in the past, and it happened all over the world. We see a European small dinosaur here, Sinosauropteryx. Oh, this one might be from China. And the authors said this about it. They proposed that these, Jihol, that's the Chinese fossils, they were scorched and perhaps covered by rapidly descending hot ash. So there's lots of volcanism, and they were subsequently covered by flood waters. And we see this in the scientific literature all over the place. They say this dinosaur was covered by flood waters. Flood waters buried these dinosaurs over here, those dinosaurs over there. And you add it all up, and it turns out that some scientist has talked about floods covering every dinosaur region all over the globe. And so it's a global phenomenon. So it reminds us of what we saw in 1980. Those of us who are ancient, like me, we saw and saw it on the news in 1980, back when we had 3 channels on the television. Most Americans have more than that now, but that's all that was on was, well, the ash is covering the, Washington state. And but that ash, pulverized rock, most of what came from Mount St. Helens in Washington State was steam, and it blasted this side of the mountain off, and it leveled the forests on the north slopes. And so imagine this, though, with hot ash, steam, and burial, but worldwide, not just one little blip in Washington State. If you could imagine this, worldwide, you'll have some inkling of what the flood did according to the Bible, and what the flood appears to have done according to the actual rocks and the actual animals buried in those rocks. Here's another catastrophically buried hadrosaur on display at this. I think I took this picture from the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles County, something like that. So we see this neck arched back. Here's a picture I took of a neck arched back, this death pose, this burial in catastrophic conditions. This one's on display at the Museum of the Rockies in Bozeman, Montana. And these signs are from that museum, evidence of catastrophe. These dinosaurs died an agonizing death, to which I say, yes, you got it right. They were in agony, but it wasn't just Montana, because these rock layers with these dinosaurs in them occur on every single continent, including Antarctica, have catastrophically buried dinosaurs. Here's one buried in Canada. Here's a Tyrannosaurus Rex named Black Beauty. We call it Black Beauty, but I don't know if it would appreciate the name. More like Black Death. This thing is neck arched back, catastrophically buried. So our geologist at the Institute for Creation Research in Dallas, Dr. Tim Clary, has made these fantastic maps showing the extent of the rock layers that we find in the real world. And he's spent so far, I think 7 or so, maybe 8 years now, using drill cores and rock exposures to map the thickness and extent of every major rock layer in the world. And you can see he's done, of course, North America, Europe, but here we have South America, and then we have Africa. And we see the same patterns in rock deposition around the whole world. So here's a pattern that we see. The earliest rock layers in South America don't have any dinosaur fossils in them, and they're limited in what areas they covered. So they're in South America. These are the lowest rock layers. We think these are the first rock layers to have been deposited in Noah's flood. And then across Northern Africa and the Middle East, we have these rock layers deposited early, and more deposited on top of these, layer after layer, several thousand feet thick. And then about midway through the flood, we believe day 150, according to scripture, something happened in the middle of that long, horrible flood year. And then we have more rocks being deposited, but now we see rock layers being deposited in the middle of the continent. And then the last, and so I'm skipping forward to the end of what we now are thinking about as the flood layers, the end of the flood. And look at this pattern. It's the same on every continent. Rocks being deposited offshore. So offshore deposition of the latest flood rocks all the way up here in the Caribbean, and wrapping around Africa and every other continent. So we have this pattern of widespread, a little bit at first, and then off the, well, that's what we expect to see if the Bible is right when it says that the Genesis 8, that the waters assuaged off the surface of the earth, and it would have done a gob of erosion as it did so. So that's what we'd expect to see. I think Peter got it right when he said that the world that then existed perished, being flooded with water. The whole world, Peter said. The whole world, Genesis said. They both agree, and the fossils agree with them. So who am I to disagree with what the Bible says throughout the scripture? And now I have less and less reason to disagree with what the Bible says about the flood, now that I see the extent of the burials of these creatures. Well, the second feature we find in these fossils is actual blood. Now, blood does not last long. It doesn't last 1 million years, anything like that. So when I saw this fossil mosasaur in the literature, in PLOS One, it's a science journal, and these authors described what they saw. And they found this little red patch in its chest cavity right here. And they looked at it and they said the traces of red may represent, the traces of hemoglobin represent residues of organs from the decaying animal. Now that's positioned right where the heart is positioned in modern day dolphins. So this is a marine reptile. It's an extinct animal, a marine reptile, but we think it swam in the pre-flood world, in the pre-flood oceans, and it must have been buried not that long ago because it's still colored red because of hemoglobin, which is the main blood protein. So the first clue that suggests that my faith in the flood is very strong, or that the world matches it, is burial, widespread burial, catastrophic burial. Now we have blood in the actual fossils themselves. Blood doesn't last that long. And I was shocked when I actually saw this very fossil on display. And so I was there. I didn't know it was going to be there, but there's my finger pointing to the fossil in the Los Angeles County Museum. And I said to my buddy, can you please take a picture? Because my camera, I turned it on to take a picture myself, but the batteries had died. So this is my friend's camera photo of me pointing to the red patch that looks like where the heart was smushed into the ribs of the mosasaur. Well, this is not just, and that, by the way, was found in Kansas, the central United States, which today is a bunch of grasslands, hundreds of miles from any ocean. But the ocean certainly, according to the Bible, covered all the high hills of the whole heavens, according to Genesis chapter 7. So burial and then blood. And we see blood vessels with red blood cells, or at least something, little structures that look like red blood cells in all kinds of different fossils. This one's from Europe. This is a Tarbosaurus from Poland, I think. And they said this in the Proceedings of the Royal Academy of Sciences back in 2007. These soft blood vessels are enigmatic, which means mysterious. We don't understand why they're there. They don't have any, they're not biomineralized. In other words, they're not minerals, they're blood vessels. And so why are they still there? They just don't have an answer. I have an answer. It's because the flood buried these thousands, not millions of years ago. That would explain what we see. Here's more blood vessels taken from a fun little dinosaur named Brachylophosaurus, found in Canada. And it's a duckbill type of dinosaur. Blood vessels, branching blood vessels with red blood cell-like structures inside them. Maybe they're still there because it's just not that old. Now, if the Bible's right, it was only thousands of years ago. In fact, Romans puts it this way, and I included this verse because I've heard it already in our seminar. So I thought I'd reiterate it and reapply it. And let me ask this question. How long has it been that people have been seeing God's invisible attributes through that which he has made? Well, the answer would be since the beginning of creation. So you have to have people there in order to see his invisible attributes. You have to have people from the beginning of creation. Well, that's Genesis chapter 1. That's the creation week. So even Paul reaffirms biblical creation, that God created things when he said he did and how he said he did. And so I have no scientific reason to doubt that, especially now that I see rapid burial, widespread burial, and blood in these fossils, which leads me to my third and final feature that fits the flood. And that's to do with my favorite dinosaur, nicknamed B-Rex, just like Sue was nicknamed Sue. B-Rex is another great Tyrannosaurus Rex, named after Bob Harmon, who discovered it in the hills of Montana, well, almost 20 years ago now. But B-Rex is great. Look, there's B-Rex, the head, and I took this picture and I was jumping up and down because I thought this is the dinosaur head skull that had the femur, that's the big leg bone, from which my colleagues extracted connective tissue and the structures you see here, the still bloody tissues still inside these T-Rex fossils. This was the one with these pictures published in the Journal of Science in 2005. This is what got me interested in this subject. And I thought I have to find out more about how long can these connective tissues last? How long can blood last? How long can biochemicals last? And how many fossils do we find these in? And it turns out that I've done a lot of research on this, and we find them all over the place. Not only inside the bone, like the T-Rex named B-Rex, but we also find them outside the bone, like this Psittacosaurus from China. It's got skin stuck down onto the bone like a mummy, naturally mummified. And the skin is like the Dead Sea Scrolls. Skin is like parchment or leather. It can last a few thousand years, but not a million years, let alone the 70 million years that my colleagues assign to these kinds of fossils. We have fossils with original proteins in them that extend into all the way down to the bottom of the rock layers. But skin is made of collagen. Bones are made of collagen also. It's a protein that we can measure the decay rate for. So here's a typical experiment, results published in 2009. We have the activation energy of this decay. Okay, and so what do you get? You get between 0.2 and 0.7 million years maximum shelf life at 10 degrees Celsius. That's as long as it can last. And here's some sequence data of, you see right here, collagen peptides from Brachylophosaurus, from a Canadian dinosaur. So we have collagen still in these dinosaurs, bone cells still in them. And we found all these papers written in the literature, paper after paper, describing biochemicals inside fossils, all kinds of fossils. Well, that's what I expect to see. And so if the flood is right, and if the flood is right, then Moses, who's responsible for Genesis, can be trusted. And therefore, when Jesus asked, the Pharisees, he said, if you do not believe Moses's writings, how will you believe my words? And so now I've got in the fossils evidence that fits. It's exactly what Moses said about the creation and the flood. And now I have more confidence than ever because of the rapid extensive burial, the blood still in there, and the protein sequences that we see from B-Rex and other creatures, that the Bible got it right. So I want to let you know that we do have resources for you. You could download these resources like books and whatnot, web articles for free from icr.org, and we have electronic versions of all of our books like Creation Basics and Beyond. These are electronically available. Oh, by the way, promo code, if you use it in the checkout, you get a discount on your order today. So do we have any questions about how these fossil features fit the flood?
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Thomas. I'm sure our audience is buzzing with questions. I'm not sure if any geologist is on tonight. That's actually my department at University of the West Indies. I know that your mic was low, but you did mention very relevant information that I just wanted to bring out a bit before we open up to the audience. So firstly, many point to fossils as evidence of evolution, but in the terms of the mechanism for preservation, is it that we actually do require rapid burial for to prevent rapid decomposition? So is it that fossils, even just the presence of fossils on such a wide scale, would actually point to rapid burial? Is that what you're saying?
The fact that you have fossils points to rapid burial. And I just read another paper yesterday describing dinosaurs in South America, and the authors said the fact that we have whole carcasses buried in this sediment indicates, and they said the phrase rapid burial. And I thought, well, you have rapid burial here, rapid burial there. And if another geologist or paleontologist describes rapid burial in South America, Africa, Europe, and China, then you know what we have? Rapid burial everywhere. And the reason we need rapid burial is to protect the dead animal from scavenging. And so, because that's what happens to today's fish or cows or whatever dies. If it dies, it gets scavenged. And so you have to protect it from scavenging. And to do that, you have to bury it and bury it deeply. And that's what we see on every continent of the globe, rapid burial.
All right, quickly. In terms of blood and stretchy tissue, was it a creationist who actually initially discovered this? Because based on my reading, I actually saw, interestingly, that it was an evolutionist, Dr. Schweizer, that first discovered this, and she did not want to even, she couldn't believe what she was seeing. And to me, that actually is almost like a hostile witness, basically, because it wasn't something that she was going to, looking to find, So just wanted to bring that out. So we do have, I think Zachary had his hand up, and I have a few questions, but Zachary, you may unmute your mic and speak.
Evening, everyone. I really like this presentation, create about a thing. So me, I always had the question, why is it that if there's a great explosion detonation, like out of pressure taking place, how would you preserve so much in animals and all that? And it's point that because I've seen a lizard, like, because where I live, there's a lot of lizards, and I've, need to try to test it out and drawn one of them. I see them go into that dead position before they actually either stay in that position or straighten out back. And those two questions, would this, all this would be basically before God had created the earth in 6 days and rest on the seventh, or would this be after the flood or during the flood in the time of Noah? That's the first question. The second question that I have, if you are saying that this is a case where the flood had taken over and preserved all of this, then people like, I don't remember the guy that came up with evolution based off of the biological similarities from a monkey. Based off of what he's saying, what do you think that is why people cling to his evidence so much? Because what they're actually finding, instead of monkeys, or maybe they could be finding monkeys, but they could also be finding dead bodies from the same flood of the time of Noah.
All right. Am I unmuted? Okay. Yeah, I think that the fossils, thanks for your question, Zachary. The two questions, boy, you get a bonus question squeezed in there. I've come to believe that these fossils were deposited in Noah's flood, which is 1656 years after creation, according to the Genesis account. One reason I believe that is because although I used to believe, back when I was trying to fit millions of years into the Bible, I used to believe that maybe these fossils formed between verses 1 and 2 of Genesis chapter 1. But then I started looking more closely at the text, and then I found this verse at the end of chapter 1 of Genesis that says, "Behold, it is all very good." And I thought, if fossils formed, before Genesis 1, then we have a whole lot of, billions of dead things, and that is a lot of not good. And so they can't be there. And so then I realized, well, what evidence do we have of watery catastrophe before creation? And if Second Peter is correct, if Peter's correct in saying that the world that then existed, the pre-flood world that existed, that world perished, being flooded with water. Well, if the rock layers were laid down back then those rock layers would have perished, being flooded with water. And so there shouldn't be any evidence from that kind of catastrophe. But what we see is these rock layers that were water deposited all over the globe with dead things by the billions. And here's what I realized is that death came after sin. Death came because of sin, biblically. And if I say that death was around millions of years before sin, then ultimately I'm undermining the gospel, and I'm doing it for no good reason, because I don't see any reason in the fossils or in the rocks to place the deposition of those fossils and rocks any further back in time than right at Noah's flood. And I've got lots of reasons for that, which we could get into. Well, you can explore that at our website, icr.org, or our books, to look at all the evidence that points to these fossils being deposited in the flood. Unfortunately, I did not understand your second question. So maybe you can re-ask it, or someone can help me
Sorry.
paraphrasing it.
So I was saying, I don't remember the guy's name, but basically, he came up with the theory that man came from monkey, or we evolved that way. And so I was saying, like, in the early stages, I provide evidence, and even he said it himself that if you can't find evidence for this, then it does not exist. It can't be practical. But I was saying in that time period of a flood, just like how God said, take two of every animal, it keep in mind that there would have been monkeys left back as well, and of course humans left back. Would you think that's where people are trying to make up evidence from that time of finding those human remains from the same flood, in a sense?
I think so. Well, every supposed ape man that I've investigated, every fossil that my evolutionary colleagues call a hominin fossil, which is just a word that confuses things by making a category that includes apes and man, when in fact fossils are either ape or men. Or a third category I found is a mixture of ape and human parts, where paleoanthropologists put them together, even though they don't belong together. And I can list specific examples of that. And in fact, you don't have to trust my words on it. I could point to secular evolutionists who have pointed the finger at their own colleagues saying, hey, this is a mixture of human parts and ape parts. Anyway, so those are the three categories. Where did those fossil apes come from? Well, they were either fossilized maybe in the flood or probably during the Ice Age. So if you have questions about the Ice Age, we answer those in our books, Creation Basics and Beyond. And the flood is required to make an Ice Age. You have to have a flood to have an Ice Age. Ironic, but physics show it to be true, or defensible anyway. And so the Ice Age would have had these massive storms that would have deposited, that would have had small scale catastrophes, and would have maybe buried some of those ape fossils and human fossils. So we have apes and humans buried together in upper Cenozoic layers. Apes and humans buried up here, middle, and down, all mixed throughout those layers that have apes or humans, have both apes and humans mixed in those layers. Despite the portrayals of my colleagues who want to say that apes are in the bottom and humans are at the top, the facts show that they're all mixed together.
Very, very good answer. So also it's very important that we actually are aware that there are hoaxes, even not only just putting ape and human parts, but even a pig's tooth. You can look that up in your time. So quickly, we have Micaiah, we have Dr. Thomas, and we have Gordon. So you three can just unmute when you're on that order, and then we go on to the next speaker quickly.
Hi, yeah, I just had a quick question about the extinction of dinosaurs. Do you believe that dinosaurs went extinct during the flood, when two of every living creature were supposed to be on the ark? Or what officially made dinosaurs go extinct?
Yeah, great question. I think that dinosaurs, the dinosaur fossils that we have are from the flood, and that dinosaurs were probably on Noah's Ark, which means they would have survived through the flood. But how long did they live after the flood? Well, it depends on which region, and it depends on, where they were and what people were doing and what the climate was doing. I think they lived after the flood because Job chapter 40 talks about behemoth, and it describes the anatomy of this big animal as having a tail like a cedar tree. And I think that was probably a dinosaur, and most likely something like a Diplodocus, because it says the strength this animal is in its hips. Diplodocus, the highest point of its body was its hips. So that's a dinosaur alive after the flood. And we have lots of human artifacts from archaeology that seem to verify that. So how did they go extinct? One by one, bit by bit, continent by continent, as climates changed and as people moved in and got rid of them. That's how creatures go extinct today. I don't see why it would be very much different in the past.
Okay, Dr. Thomas, you may unmute. Oh, sorry. Yes, thank you as well for your question.
All right. Greetings again, everyone. Just wanted to hear a little bit more about the potential, disparity in the carbon dating. I know that carbon dating is kind of a foundational principle in terms of dating the fossils. So how do we explain that disparity?
Okay, so when people ask me about carbon, by the way, Daniel, thanks for impersonating me early on in this creation conference. You did a good job. So it's, no, but I'm the different. We share the same last name. I think it's great. So carbon dating is actually used mostly by archaeologists to date recently deposited artifacts, mostly within the interest of human artifacts and human remains. That's in contrast to other radioisotope methods, which geologists use to assign ages to rocks that are buried in general much more deeply than human remains and carbon-containing remains. Well, let me just say this. I only have a second. The maximum shelf life for radiocarbon is about 100,000 years based on the measured decay rate of a radiocarbon. That's carbon-14. So if you find radiocarbon in some sort of artifact or remains, it has to be fewer than 100,000 years, unless somehow it picked up radiocarbon, after it was buried, which we need to, that's a caveat. So why do we have radiocarbon still in dinosaur bones? I've sent them off to the lab myself, got the results back for about a dozen different samples, several different labs. Radiocarbon in fossils from China, from the Western United States. We found radiocarbon in fish fossils, dinosaur fossils, clam shells, ammonite shells. These are supposed to be hundreds of millions of years old. Even found in the literature, a fossil sponge with radiocarbon still in it, and radiocarbon in coal. Of course, coal is almost pure carbon, but it's supposed to be 200 million years old, but it's got radiocarbon in it as though it's fewer than 100,000 years old. And even in diamonds, so you can read all about that with our RATE research, radioisotopes and the age of the Earth, at icr.org/rate.
Well, yes, so much information. I just wanted to also add, I have there's a website that I stumbled upon that is not a creationist organization. It's called newgeology.us. And this group of scientists, they have found carbon-14 in dinosaur bones. I'm gonna just quickly share my screen here so you can see. And their abstracts have been, they've received a lot of censorship, and they have this website basically trying to bring out their scientific findings, and this is not a creationist website. So it's really something that, because the paradigm of evolution is so dominant, that academics, you won't see a lot of this being out there in the literature, but it is real. And even among people who are not Christians, if they're honest in their research, they will actually admit that there is a conundrum. There is something is off with the paradigm. The last thing, I didn't want to finish this without asking this. Sorry, Mr. Riddle, I'm just gonna be probably 2 minutes on this, but I think this is important to ask. There are alternative hypotheses about how these, blood and can be preserved. One such is the presence of iron, that some people say that would render the proteins inert and slow down the decay process. So what would you say quickly to this alternative hypothesis? Have there been discoveries of iron in these mounds that would be, is this mechanism even possible to preserve in keeping the time period that they assert in the evolutionary theory?
Well, so there's a lot of nuance and complications here, but bottom line, if you're going to tell me that iron can preserve tissue for millions of years, then let's paint our steak with iron, and let's see if and put it in the fridge. Maybe that would help too. And let's see if it'll last, for my grandchildren, and they'll eat the steak. I don't think that iron will do the task that they want it to do. And in order for me to be convinced that iron can do this miracle, I would need to see a decay rate study with iron in and on the bone. And I want to see iron in there, and we're actually trying to replicate that very study ourselves to show the effects of iron. We need to do the good science, and no one's done it. So to make a claim now that iron can preserve tissues for millions of years goes beyond the data, and that's the safe thing I can say about it.
Oh, thank you so much, Dr. Thomas. We'll be looking forward for your results when it comes out. All right, thanks again for your time as well. So our final speaker for tonight has been a personal teacher and esteemed friend. I met him first at the Jamaica Theological Seminary when he visited Jamaica in 2016. And my family and I were trained by him in 2018. But before we actually speak to Mr. Riddle, I'll just want to share our final factoid on faithful scientists. And our final one is George Washington Carver. He was a Protestant evangelist and Bible class leader whose faith in Jesus was a mechanism through which he carried out his scientific work. He improved the agricultural economy of the USA by promoting nitrogen, providing peanuts as an alternative crop to cotton to prevent soil depletion. So all of these scientists have really contributed to make science what it is today. And our final speaker, Mike Riddle, is another esteemed person here. So Mike is the founder and president of the Creation Training Initiative. He is an international speaker and teacher on biblical creation apologetics and Christian education. Mike has been involved in creation apologetics for over 35 years. He has spoken at NASA, many secular and Christian universities and churches around the world, state homeschool conventions, and secular and Christian schools. Prior to being involved in creation ministry, Mike was a captain at the USMC and a nation champion in track and field. Mike's experience in the educational field includes a university degree in math and MA in education. He's also been an adjunct professor at the Northwest Graduate School of the Ministry and has worked with several ministries, including ICR and Answers in Genesis. He has also been director or instructor for the US Sprints Worldwide Engineer and Technical Training, and also has served as director and instructor of Microsoft's engineer training and an instructor for the US Marine Corps. And he resides in Meridian, Idaho with his wife, Leslie. I think I saw Leslie on here, but I'm not sure. You can look at the link creationtraining.org. And Mr. Riddle, the floor is yours. Thanks again for making the time to join us.
Well, thank you, Sarah. This has been a privilege and an honor just to hear all these other speakers. What a wealth of information. It's made a pretty good evening for me. And let you know it's better than watching anything we possibly see on TV. But I'm not going to use any PowerPoint slides because I'm going to talk faster than I can change the slides. It's just one of my characteristics. And scientifically, you can listen faster than I can talk. So the topic I've been assigned here is the impossibility of evolution. In other words, is evolution even possible? Well, let's start here. There's only two possible ways everything could have gotten here. Either we evolved or we were created. There are no third choices here. I have people say, oh, there could be a third choice. My answer to that is name one. There's only two possible choices, either created or we evolved. Some people try and mix these two together, say God could have used evolution. Well, it's not a matter of what God could have done. It's a matter of what did he do? In the Bible, it clearly says, in multiple books of the Bible, he created all things. But also to state that God used evolution is very unbiblical. It's also not very good science either. For example, the order of events for evolution, how they think everything came into existence, and what the Bible teaches are completely opposite. In other words, the Bible teaches that the earth came first, then the stars. Evolution teaches stars came first, then the earth. You can't have it both ways, or you just nullified the law of non-contradiction, which says two opposites in the same time and place can't be equal. They have to be opposite. The Bible teaches that birds were created first, then came the reptiles. Evolution teaches just the opposite. Reptiles were here first, and then came birds. The Bible teaches land plants were here on day 3 and the sun on day 4. Evolution teaches the sun was here first, then land plants. But the Bible also teaches man was here first, then came death. Evolution teaches death, millions of years of death, then came man. These two are opposite, folks. And since there's only two possible choices, one of them is right and the other one has to be wrong. And it's your choice which one you want to believe. But I'm going to tell you that evolution could not have happened. Why? Because of the first 5 words of the Bible, which teach, in the beginning, God created. What does that mean? Well, here's a very powerful statement I like to use in discussions. Without a creator God, nothing could exist. Therefore, God must exist. That's my answer to where did God come from? What about distant starlight? What about dinosaurs? All of that is without a creator God, nothing could exist. Then I like to ask the challenge here. Could evolutionists, non-believers, using nothing but empirical science that's observable and repeatable science, show me where the matter came from to create this universe or why anything exists at all? And the answer is they cannot do that. They must rely on faith. It is not observable, nor is it repeatable. So the playing field is now level. My faith is in a creator God who says he created everything. Evolutionist non-believers' faith is in somehow it must have came into existence, but cannot show anything observable or repeat that experiment. So ultimately, they have to start with a faith. So that's the argument I would use. And the Bible says also how God created. I hear these college professors teaching there, oh, the Bible doesn't teach how God created. Yes, it does. Try reading the Bible once in a while. You see, in Genesis 1, it clearly teaches God spoke everything into existence. We see repeatedly, and God said, and God said, and God said. Then in Psalm 33, verses 6 and 9, it says, he spoke everything into existence. And it repeats that again in Hebrews 11:3. He called everything to existence by the breath of his mouth, by his word. In other words, we have a powerful God who can do those things. So did God use evolution? Absolutely not. Anyone teaching that is anti-biblical. It also changes many other parts of the Bible, because to say God used evolution implies millions of years. Once you insert millions of years in the Bible, you have now destroyed the entire foundation for the gospel of Jesus Christ. Because I like to talk about this. When we talk about the order of events in the Bible, we start with, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And he goes through the 6 days of creation, Genesis 1. And then it says in Genesis 1:31, his creation was very good or perfect. Now, then comes the fall, the sin and fall. Now, if we add millions of years into all of this, here's what we have. In the beginning, God created. And that creation goes on for millions and millions of years. Finally, along come Adam and Eve, and then the fall. The question would be, what's going on for those millions of years before Adam and Eve the fall? And the answer is death. That's what the fossil record is. It's a record of dead things, decay and disease. All that would be happening before the fall, before sin. So millions of years clearly teaches death before sin, and it changes the character of God. Because in Genesis 1:31, God would have called all those dead things, all those diseases, all that decay, and all that struggle very good. That is not the God of the Bible that I see in there. God said his creation was very good, meaning exceedingly good or perfect. No diseases, no death. So did God use evolution? No. Is evolution even possible? Well, I'm not going to get into the big numbers. We've seen some of the big numbers, but let's take a look at some of the things. Where did the matter come from to create this universe for the evolutionist, non-believer? They don't have an answer based on empirical science. How did life originate? Our best scientists can't even produce, by any random chance, one small biological protein. We don't have to talk about the DNA, the RNA, the organelles, and all those other pieces. Just one small biological protein we have not been able to create in a laboratory by any form of random chance. Someday we might do it, but it will use tremendous amounts of intelligence to do this, not random chance processes. How about the origin of dinosaurs? I've been in museums all over the world. What do I see? Dinosaurs. I look at pictures and textbooks. What do I see? Dinosaurs. I look at all these charts about dinosaurs. What's missing there? All the thousands of transitions leading up to dinosaurs. Why are they not in any museums? Every example they use, and there's only a few of them, looks very much like a very mature reptile, almost like a dinosaur. Where are all the transitions leading up to the dinosaurs? There is no answer. So when we look at the science, the scientific evidence, people say, are science and the Bible compatible? And the answer is absolutely yes. True science and the Bible are compatible. Because who's the creator of all the scientific principles? God is. He's not incompatible with himself, folks. See, the difference here is this. Evolution and the Bible are different, and true science and evolution are also different. See, I'm going to use a technical term here. We have been snookered into believing evolution has a lot of evidence. No, they don't. They have ideas, they have models, they have hypotheses, but no facts to support their claim. So, but here's the problem. Here's the problem we get into. And I'm going to go after the church a little bit on this one, because one of my fields I like to talk about is education. Over the last several generations, going back to my generation called the baby boomers, just after World War II, to Gen X, the millennials, and the generation today, Gen Z, when we look what's happening here, we have all the scientific evidence, we have the Bible on our side, but yet we see over 60% of our youth leaving the church. Over 80% of our youth have doubts about the Bible. Something is wrong in Christian education. So I talk about evolution, but let's talk about our own world, what we have going on for ourselves. What's happening in Christianity today? Why are so many leaving the church? Well, some of the popular reasons are they don't see that the church is valid. Christianity, they say, is shallow. Well, there's no reason for Christianity to be shallow, except we have a lot of pastors in the pulpit teaching shallow doctrine, not even mention the tough doctrines, avoiding some of the tough issues like sin and hell and creation evolution. It's called soft preaching. Christianity, we're told by these youth, is anti-science. Why is that? We own all the science. Did you know we can actually teach science in our Sunday school classes in the church? Why? Because God created all science. You don't have to turn it into a science class, but we can teach about dinosaurs. We can teach all these things. We can teach about the origin of matter. We can teach about the origin of life, so long as you don't turn it into a science class. We can keep the science very simple and easy, what they need to know. Lack of scientific evidence is another excuse. Folks, we have all the scientific evidence in the world. So why do we get this excuse? Because we don't have people in our churches qualified to teach these subjects in our Sunday school classes, in our Christian schools. We need to start getting teachers trained. Learning about evolution in college. Our students are not prepared for what they're going to get in college. Why is that? Because we forgot to train them in our Christian schools. We've got to train them in our churches. And the number one source of our training, folks, is parents. We as parents are ultimately responsible for our child's education. So we need to step up and start training our youth. And then also college is a hostile environment towards Christians, especially Christians who accept what the Bible teaches, a little six-day creation about, notice I use that word about, 6,000 years ago. So we need people who can teach this and train our youth. And finally, what I found out is a lot of these youth in these youth groups are simply not saved. So those are some of the main reasons. 60% of our youth are leaving the church, and about 80% of them have doubts about the Bible. So we need to clean up our own act first to make sure that we get this next generation. Starting in my generation, again, the baby boomers, it was estimated about 10% of our youth had a biblical worldview. Now it's down to less than 4% of our youth in this country have a biblical worldview. What that tells us is what we're doing in the church, folks, what we're doing in the Christian schools is not working. We've got to start getting on the playing field, get into the battle, and train our people and do what the Bible tells us. 1 Peter 3:15, have a ready answer always for the hope that's within us, but do this with gentleness and respect. We're commanded to have an answer for what we believe. That is not being carried out in our churches. Jude 3, we are commanded to be able to contend for the faith. 2 Corinthians 10:4-5, we are commanded to bring down all strongholds and everything that exalts itself against the knowledge of God. Why aren't we carrying that out in the churches? And incidentally, the other thing I discovered was this. I went out on the internet, looked at mission statements from churches all over the country. What I found is most of them don't have a biblical worldview. They don't even have the correct mission statement. The mission statement's right there in the Bible. It comes out of, it's called the Great Commission. That is the mission every church should have in their statement, what their mission is. Some of them have it in there, but they don't know how to carry it out. Because see, in there, there's an imperative verb in that statement. Go ye therefore and make disciples. That's the imperative verb. We're told to make disciples. That doesn't mean we get up there and just lecture and expect everybody to be able to use it. In James, it says we're to produce doers of the word, not just hearers. We need to change how we're doing Christian education. We need to produce disciples, doers of the word, not just hearers and listeners. We need to have some level of accountability in there that can help people to be able to use God's word and evangelize. We're missing that whole part on evangelism. We're missing the whole part on apologetics. We're missing the whole part on making disciples, and we're missing the whole part on discerning, being discerning Christians. So we can talk about the world and what's going on there. But first, we got to start cleaning up our worldview here in our world. Why don't we start training the way the Bible teaches to make doers of the word, make disciples? See, the whole model is not build big churches. Nothing wrong with big churches. But that's not what the Bible teaches. The Bible teaches we're to train who's ever there and send them out. There's a theme I like to use now is a challenge to churches. Is your church a cruise ship or is it an aircraft carrier? See, on cruise ships, we get together and have a lot of fun. We meet with people, we talk with people, or you might have a special cruise ship where you have a Bible conference on it. And you got great speakers in there, but that's as far as the information goes. But see, an aircraft carrier, we have trained pilots, the well-trained pilots, and they take off in those planes and they go out and strike the enemy at long distances. That's not what the church is doing. Most of our churches today are nothing but cruise ships. We need to follow what the Bible teaches. We are commanded to go out and make disciples, not build big churches. We are commanded to bring down all strongholds and be able to defend our faith. These are the things we need to be able to train our next youth on, our next generation on, and get away from this idea that God used evolution and get pastors who are well-trained to teach God's word and not be afraid of it and not compromise it. Then we can start making some inroads. The science is great, and the Answers in Genesis, ICR, and Creation Ministries International are doing great jobs out there getting this information, but we've got to take the next step. Just hearing the information takes us only so far. We've got to train our youth so they can actively use apologetics, defend their faith, and go out there and be evangelists. Or we'll continue to lose, and that 4% will go lower and lower, because what we're doing, folks, is simply not working well enough. So we've got to get a whole new model in education on how we're going to do this. And the world, when I look at what's happening out there, by far, the world is out-educating the church. We're being completely out-educated. For example, the first week of college is called College Welcome Week. In that week, our students lose their faith right there. Before they've even taken the first class, they are persuaded to drop their thinking about Christianity. You're told you will be part of a group. No, you don't have to be. They're coercion to be part of a group. You will think like the group. You'll get rid of your outdated Christian or religious beliefs that you've had. Homosexuality is normal, and everyone drinks and has premarital sex. That's what goes on during College Welcome Week, and we lose many of our youth there. They have a whole initiative out there called the Teaching Evolution Initiative, and part of that whole initiative is great. What they're doing is well beyond what the church is doing. They are training teachers how to better teach evolution. What a novel idea. Why doesn't the church train people how to better teach God's creation and evangelize the lost? See, we're being out-educated. Then there's the whole clergy letter project, where over 17,000 church leaders and pastors on Darwin's birthday week preach Charles Darwin and evolution from the pulpit. What a sad commentary that is. Then there's the National Center for Science Education, where they produce lots of materials and help teachers how to handle creationists and Christians, and how to better teach evolution for the teachers. The National Center for Science Education, they do the same thing. They train their teachers. Matter of fact, a lot of these organizations pay to bring teachers in and train them. What a novel idea. And then there's a group called Biologos, which is a wolf in sheep's clothing, folks. Watch out here, because on their website, they talk about, oh, we're creationists. We believe in the Bible. But then you read a little further, and what they say is we believe 100% evolution, that we went from ape-like creatures to human beings, amoeba to man. In other words, they believe in 100% evolution, and that's how God created everything. Folks, that is not biblical. That is a different God and a different gospel right there. So we are being out-educated, we're outnumbered, we're surrounded, and we're out-financed. What an advantage we have, folks. See, this is not a time to sit back and say, woe is us. When we were outnumbered, surrounded, and out-financed, we have the advantage. Because in the United States Marine Corps, we're trained that when you're surrounded, you know two things about the enemy. You know where they are, and you know how to attack them. You can attack them in any direction, folks. We need to start equipping our youth, or we're going to lose, again, another generation. What we need to be training them on, how to know, share, and defend the gospel of Jesus Christ. That's the number one thing we need to be training our youth. Not just hear it, but can they do it themselves? In other words, can they become doers of the word? Know, share, and defend the gospel of Jesus Christ. We need to train them to not only think biblically, but live biblically. We need to train them how to respond to biblical challenges, such as who became Mary? How can the first 3 days of creation be real days without the sun? How could Noah fit all the creatures on the ark? We need to train them how to think critically and analyze statements and ask critical thinking questions like, has that ever been observed? Are you making any assumption? And how do you know it's true? We need to show them how to refute evolutionism, how to do presuppositional apologetics, how to answer the tough questions like, who made God? How can God be good when he allows bad things to happen? Those are presuppositional apologetics. How to respond to claims of moral relativists, such as there are no absolutes. That's true for you, but not true for me. And how to recognize and respond to biblical compromise called God used evolution, or billions and billions of years being inserted into the Bible. And finally, how to respond to the teachings of social justice and critical race theory. That's what we need to be training our youth on. And we need to be training so that they can actually verbalize it and go out there and evangelize in their generation. And then we'll stop losing that 60%. Then we'll start cleaning up our own house. And that's basically what I wanted to say here is we need to do something about it. We can do all the science, but if our people can't use it, what good is it? We're to make disciples, get out there in the battlefield, and start evangelizing a world that is lost. So that's what I have to say, Sarah. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Riddle. We feel your passion, and thank you so much for challenging us. We are motivated to really try and reach out, because it is definitely, especially in the coronavirus time, it has just made it worse because we don't have much of a direct contact with our church communities as we used to. I would just want to invite those who have not signed up yet. I had put also Mr. Riddle's website in the chat. I can repeat that, and also a Google document if you would like to be mentored. Thank God, I have actually, I'm part of different organizations that can have mentor you and help to train you to defend your faith in a more, effective way. So I would encourage you to sign up. I do see in the poll that only 8%, 8 out of the 89 had responded. But anyway, let me just quickly move on. I think we're going to have to extend this to 9:15 if you have the time. But just to quickly ask, honing in about the evolution, I remember, two specific entities, water and oxygen. They're both needed if you have life, and they also would destroy life if they were there at the beginning. So water, a large proportion of our cells is made of water, but water also hydrolyzes, and oxygen is a similar thing. You have oxidization, so it would break up any molecule. So could you comment a little bit on the probabilities of, if you have water and you don't have water, life could not exist either way. If you have oxygen in the beginning or don't have oxygen, life could not be here. So
yes, we need oxygen to survive. That's a known factor. Without oxygen, we're not here. We become what we call extinct, which is a polite word for dead. So we need oxygen, but oxygen destroys chemical bonds. So life could not have originated in an oxygenated atmosphere, because it destroys the chemical bonds. We'd had no amino acids really formed for very long, and proteins would not have happened. So what the evolutionists do is to say, well, the early atmosphere, the early Earth, didn't have oxygen in it. Well, that's very interesting. So if you take all the oxygen away, which means you also have to take the ozone away because it's made of O3 oxygen, then everything dies anyway because the ultraviolet rays of the sun come down and turn everything into, and I'll use the technical term, crispy critters. We're all dead again. So if there is oxygen in the atmosphere, life can't start. No oxygen, life can't start. That's pretty good. But what about maybe the life started down deep in the oceans? That's an interesting concept, down deep in the ocean. I love it when people say that. So that way the sun rays could not penetrate. Way down deep in the oceans have those big hydrothermal vents, some heat being generated. Well, there's a process of water called hydrolysis. Hydro means what? Water. Hydrolysis literally means water splitting. As soon as any amino acids might have formed within the oceans, within a matter of weeks, they would have all been destroyed. See, water is one of the worst places in the universe for life to begin. So with or without oxygen, life can't start, and it can't start in the water. So tremendous probability problem right there, because you have to have the right conditions. And then you get into the amino acids, that's even a bigger probability problem. So again, our best scientists in the world have not been able to randomly generate one small biological protein.
Right, because the proteins for life only have left-handed. So if by chance it would be a 50-50% production of these and life could not have existed. So yes, definitely. I just wanted, before I see Marcel, your hand is up, but I wanted to still speak a bit. Someone might not be convinced and believe that the only reason you are a Christian today, having a scientific background, at least in math, that you were brought up in Christianity. Is this true? Have you always been a Christian?
Well, a couple of statements. There's a couple of things in there. One, I was not a Christian until I was 30 years old. I was a complete evolutionist until I started studying. First of all, I believe in evolution. I was taught evolution. It sounded really good to me. But then somebody witnessed to me, and I started reading Genesis, and I thought, wait a minute. If this book is not true in the first chapter, why read any more of it? Because we can't trust the first chapter of Genesis. No reason to read the rest of it. So I started studying, and I started going around asking questions to professors who believe in evolution and scientists, and I soon found a pattern. They had a lot of great stories, but none of them could directly answer my questions. I could see through their answers. They did not have their observable or repeatable evidence to back their claims. All they had was a lot of stories and here and there, but couldn't directly produce any real evidence. So I thought to myself, here's these people, they tower above me in intelligence, but they could not explain and give me observable evidence. So I turned back to the Bible. At age 30, I became a Christian. The other part of that is it's really called you believe what you believe because of your circumstances. So people will say that you're just a Christian because you're raised in a Christian family, or you're a Muslim because you're raised in a Muslim family. You're a Mormon because that's the family you grew up in. Well, we can do the same for the non-believer. You're a non-believer because that's the kind of family you grew up in. So it's what we're basically saying. You didn't study anything. You're just a non-believer because that's the family you grew up in. Also, they forget there is good evidence that the Bible is true. See, they're forgetting that whole part. When we examine the Bible and we look at the scientific evidence, there's overwhelming and powerful evidence the Bible is true, and it is God's word from beginning to end. So they miss all those other points, and they forget their own circumstances too. So no, I was not a Christian until I was age 30.
Oh, very, very interesting testimony. All right, so we'll hand over to Marcel. Marcel, you have a question?
Also, thank you, sir. Also, to quickly comment that people also should recognize that a lot of people who have created major world religions actually stem from a different world religion in itself, and they disagreed with it and came up with a new world religion. So that argument is flawed in itself. All right, so I just want to say that. Mr. Riddle, you were speaking on the different types of days and the use of the word days in the creation story. My thing is that I was thinking that there's a lot of different usage. There's a lot of different ways that word day is being used during that passage in Genesis 1. Couldn't that also help to account for something like you said, a million of years? You were speaking on that. Could you elaborate a bit more on it? Because I was of the original fact, due to the different usage of the word days, it could possibly allude for the longer extended period versus a 6,000 year creation.
Okay, the word day there, Hebrew word is yom. Could that mean something other than the day? Well, the Hebrew word yom can have different meanings. It can mean the daylight portion of the day. It can mean a 24-hour period. It can mean a month, a year, or some long indefinite period of time. But the key to understanding when you have a word that can have multiple different meanings is context. That's one of the rules of interpretation. For example, if I were to say this, and you don't have to answer, I'll go ahead and answer it myself. Pronounce this word, B-O-W, B-O-W. Well, bow, but it can also be pronounced bow. So that same word can have two different pronunciations. How do you determine how to pronounce it then? The context it is used in. And the same for day. And incidentally, in Genesis 1:5, God defines the day. He clearly defines what a day is. He defines it as the light and dark portion. So the first use of the word day is in Genesis 1:3, and then he defines it in Genesis 1:5. So right there, God defined what it was. In addition, every time in the Old Testament we have a number with the word day, it always means a day. Whenever it has evening and morning with it, it always means a day. And also, when we turn to the Ten Commandments, God wrote down in Exodus 20, verse 11, this is the Ten Commandments. God is writing this down. For in 6 days, the Lord made the heaven, the earth, and sea, and all is in them. And a third time in Exodus 31, verses 15 and 17, God reiterates one more time that he created everything in 6 days. Nowhere in the Bible does it allude to God created everything in millions of years. But 3 times it clearly states 6 days. And also, Jesus Christ was a believer in a young earth. In Mark 10, because I really appreciate this question. It's a very valid question. It's a lot of contention within the church itself. But in Mark 10, verse 6, Jesus makes a very profound statement. And again, he's the creator of all things, so he's the eyewitness to all of this. But from the beginning of the creation, God made them male and female. Now, Jesus is talking about marriage, but what he's saying here is, from the beginning of the creation, very beginning, from the beginning of creation, man and woman were on this planet, not after millions of years. So there again, was Jesus right or was he wrong? If he's wrong, folks, we're still dead in our sins because he's not a good savior. So does the Bible teach literal days? I don't see any way out of that it teaches literal days. And the real question is, why did God take so long as 6 days? That's the real question you should be asking as Christians. And incidentally, God answers that question in the Ten Commandments, work 6, rest 1. So he gave us a model for how to live and work there. But once you add millions of years in the Bible, you're now teaching death before sin. And God called all that death very good. In other words, we lose the foundation for the gospel. It's like in any computer operating system, for all you people who like computers. If you start changing one thing in the operating system, it can affect many other components in the operating system. You start changing some of the foundation in the Bible, then it can affect many other parts of the Bible also. Once we change what the clear meaning is, we lose the foundation of the gospel. God's character changes. Jesus is not telling the truth. And now the 10 Commandments don't really mean what they say, because commandment number 4 says 4 and 6 days. If the days of creation were not literal days, then that commandment doesn't mean what it says. What about the other 9 now? So now we just throw out the 10 Commandments. So yes, it really does matter what we believe there. So I thank you for that question. I would not have brought it up, but I'm glad you did, because it is extremely important to the Christian. Because those first 3 chapters of Genesis is the reason the whole rest of the Bible had to take place. So to say creation is not an important issue or it's a secondary doctrine is a false statement. It is foundational for understanding the entire rest of the gospel. So that would be my quick answer, Marcel. I do have a longer one, but I know we're bound by time there.
Yes,
I've learned to talk out both sides of my mouth at the same time so I can get more information out.
I appreciate it. I hope I could Sarah could connect me more to her, because I have more questions and I do recognize the time. Sarah, if you could connect or not, because I was also thinking of, the fact that we see, as you pointed out, right, the different uses of the word day and how they classify them. And there's still some form of a doctrine going around that we're still in the 6th day, or that God is still rested, or we're in the 7th day where God is resting on. And on the end of that 7th day, we have Jesus coming and, the whole world coming to an end. There's that theology or that theory also going around in the church. That's why this whole uses of the word day is so important. I'd love to go into a lot more depths with you, but thank you.
Yes, the 7th day is we're still in the 7th day. Well, there's some problems with that, the language usage, and I know who is promoting that. There's a gentleman out there who promotes that, but he hasn't read the New Testament well, because the New Testament talks about that issue and that the day is finished. And you have to look at the grammar that's used there in the Hebrew language. And I know the gentleman who does that is not a Hebrew scholar, and he does many other things wrong too in the Bible too. And so his credibility is not there. But no, we're not in the seventh day anymore. That seventh day is completed. And the Bible, I think, makes it very clear in the language usage there. So that would be my quick answer there. No, we're not still in the seventh day. Just because it doesn't end the same way the other days do does not mean it's not a 24-hour period.
Yes, Marcel. So we can make that connection, but I would also add it on the seventh day. It's in the past tense. It said God rested on the seventh day. So that's one thing. I would have a follow-up question about the scripture that says that God to one day is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is as one day.
Okay.
Could you just quickly deal with that objection?
2 Peter 3, a day is 1,000 years, 1,000 years, the day of the Lord. Well, three parts of that. Number one, does that have anything to do with the creation account? We look at the context. Well, the context of 2 Peter 3, read above it, read below it, is not talking about creation. It's talking about the characteristics of God and the end times. So it's not talking about Genesis or creation. It's talking about God is not bound by time. He created time. He's not bound by it. And then we need to look at a key word there. Day is 1,000 years. It's 1,000 years, the day of the Lord. The word as is in there. That word as turns this into what we call a simile or figure of speech, which means it's not meant to be taken literally. Now, figure of speech is where we put a group of words together, and they don't have to take on a literal meaning, but they connotate something real. Such as if I were saying it's raining cats and dogs. Are cats and dogs literally coming down from the clouds? No, it's a figure of speech, meaning a torrential downpour. Or if I told somebody, wow, I watched you run yesterday and you run like a gazelle. Now, did I just call that person an animal? No, it's a figure of speech, meaning they run fast and they run gracefully. So that's a figure of speech, and that's what 2 Peter 3 is. It's a figure of speech not meant to be taken literally, but we don't see words such as or like in Genesis 1. Genesis 1 is actually written in the Hebrew narrative format. So that's a quick answer there. I like quick answers.
Thank you so much, Mr. Riddle. All right. So in closing, I just want to, you have some very great training programs which my family benefited from in the past. Would you mind just telling our audience about it, how they can access you and your materials?
Yes, all the things I talked about in that fast-paced talk there is, now remember, I do talk fast. I'm used to training Microsoft software engineers. They like information as fast as they can get it. Doesn't mean they understand it, but they like it fast. But we are doing something about this. We have a whole project now called the 2 Timothy 2:2 Education Project. 2 Timothy 2:2 is one of the best verses in the Bible on discipleship. And Paul's talking to Timothy, says, Timothy, now that I've trained, I'm paraphrasing here, now that I've trained you, you go out and do what I did. You train others how to teach also. We're in the business of training others how to speak and teach on biblical creation. And we've set up a whole program where we're now building master apologists. We have a master apologist program. We're going to build better apologists than most of our colleges because we're going to focus on biblical apologetics, the scientific evidence, and presuppositional apologetics. Where in a lot of colleges, they focus too much on philosophy and the history of apologetics. I've never used that in debate or an argument anywhere. And then we've got a thing called our Christian Educator Conference. We ran our first one this year at the Institute for Creation Research Center there. We had 100 come. That's all we can take is 100 from about 12 different states came, 4 days of intense training. And when they went out, they were ready to start doing some teaching. They were confident now. And we don't just sit around the table. We go from 8:30 to 5:30. I don't give many breaks. And we are teaching all the time. You know, you've experienced that, Sarah, in our 5-day class. So we're doing that. We also have a 5-day, very intense class that's coming up August this next year. 5 days. You don't come to this thing for sitting around the table and expressing opinions. You're in that class from 8:30 in the morning to 8:30 at night, and you will not be tired because I won't let you be tired. And you have to actually perform in that 5 days. You have to do a couple of presentations. We grade you. We give you 5 minutes. And as Sarah knows, you don't go 1 second over because I have a stopwatch there. And but you know what our success rate is after about 6 years? We're going to do our 7th year. Our success rate is right at 100%. I don't tolerate failure in Christian education. We will work as a team to bring everybody along. We don't leave anybody behind. That's the Marine Corps way. We don't leave our dead behind. We bring everybody with us. And we're going to succeed, and we're going to do it again this year or next year in August. We're also even looking at having a youth pastor, youth leader conference, maybe next year, beginning of 2023. We're looking for people to help with these things. See, the biggest audience we can get, we have our 2 Timothy 2 project or program there. We can reach in 5 years, fully equipped 15,000 youth to verbally be able to defend their faith and share the gospel of Jesus Christ. How we're going to do that? We're not going to be a big ministry. We don't need to be a big ministry. What we're going to do is train the people who have direct access to our youth. We're going to be training the Christian school teachers and the youth pastors. They have very important jobs, probably more important than any computer job in the world, because they're there to help change lives for eternity. So we want to partner with these youth pastors and use them in their position they're in. It's a very important position. We want to do the same thing for Christian educators, because they can reach far more than I or any ministry can reach, because they have direct contact with them for a whole year. So that's our project, and we're looking for people who want to help with this. So you go to our website, you can start finding out more and more about this project. So that's what we're doing. I talk a lot about we need to do something, and our ministry is doing something, and we're actually partnering a little bit with the Institute for Creation Research. They've been a great help to us already, and we're looking to do some more for them and help them out in any way we can. Because one of the things we do to help them, Brian, is we take your newsletter signups, not ours, and we get more and more people to sign up for your newsletter, because we like what you do and you have a great magazine there. And so does CMI. They have great information, and AIG has great information, but we've gotten together with ICR and we just like the folks down there. I like the weather down there too. So that was a long answer.
Wow, thank you so much, Mr. Riddle. Thank you so much for everyone. We certainly had a lot said to us tonight. So, I put in the chat the link to our videos, so you can feel free to go over when you have your time. So if you missed part of it, for example, Marcel, I see your hand is raised. You can quickly, all right, you can go ahead.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. I would just like to say thank you to all the persons who are here. I really think I benefited personal, and I think the audience here has benefited personal. The fact that so many have stayed long over the time that Sarah has broadcasted tells you that you have captured our attention in a very great way. This is something that I was always dreaming about, but Sarah has actually fulfilled this dream that I've always thinking about. I was trying to do something like this for my department, but never got that opportunity to. And I'm so grateful to be a part of this whole thing. Sarah, I do hope that we could have a part 2 for a discussion like this. I would be definitely interested in getting along, and I'm hoping that I could bring on more persons with me next time. Keep up the good work, really good work.
Thanks, Marcel. It's really a partnership, and thanks again for all of you who have attended. We know that everyone is usually very busy, especially in these times. So thank you for your interest. I've put in the chat again for those interested to sign up for more, because we do have a few more in this series, but not on science, but we have a mentorship opportunity for us to connect. I'm a member of the Creation Research Society as well as the International Association for Creation. So we do have other scientists that we are connected to, and who I believe would be happy to even have personal one-on-one training. Someone says they cannot copy the chat. Someone else was asking if there will be training in Jamaica. Anyone outside, any of the scientists here can say if they plan to have a training in Jamaica, but what I will say is that Chosen to Glow is planning to have our Campus Changers Club, which will provide training and try to connect with hopefully some of them that are here now would be willing to come back, even as a one-time mentor. But that is in the works, and I'm willing to meet with you for your ideas as well. So it's in the chat. I hope that you are able to access these. You can copy it so that when it's done, when the presentations are done, you can actually get access to this. So again, I'd really love to say a great thank you to all of our presenters. Some of you might not even be in our time zones. It might be later for you. Thank you for taking your time to join us this evening and answer the questions that we have in our hearts. All right, just before we leave, as usual, I'm going to be just sharing our question for this week. Our competition continues for you to practice what we've learned today. So, week 6 challenge.
Sarah, I think the sound is not coming through.
I did purposely not share the sound last week. Facebook told me that I copyrighted, which I didn't. But anyway, all right. So how does science help us to know more about the God of the Bible? Record and upload your video, 1-minute video to Facebook. Answering this question, tag our ministry at the hashtag #YouthForTruth and caption your video with your name, your organization if applicable, and the question you're answering. So entries are open now and close next Tuesday at midday Jamaica time. And every entrant will win prizes, including tours. There's a tour, a virtual tour at the Smithsonian that has been sponsored by the International Association for Creation. There is a mistake right here, but anyway, join us next week, God willing, which we will actually look at, is there only one way to God? So that's the actual topic. We have the same meeting ID, the same passcode, and just for my concluding statement here, I wanted to conclude with the words of Sir Isaac Newton. The most beautiful system of the sun, the planets, and the comets could only proceed from the counsel and dominion of an intelligent being. This being governs all things, not as the soul of the world, but as Lord over all. And on account of his dominion, he is wont to be called Lord God. And this can be found in his work Principia, Book 3, and it's cited in Newton's Philosophy of Nature. So as we saw today, faith in God, the expectation of repeatability, the expectation of order and design has historically been the most fertile basis for scientific discovery of our great fathers in science. As Psalm 111 verse 2 states, the works of the Lord are great, studied by all who have pleasure in them. So studying and asking questions about our world is not against faith. We do contend here that it is a reasonable faith to believe in a guiding creator as we discover more about the mysteries in our world. So I do challenge everyone here today and those who will be hearing me after that you will continue asking questions openly, continue to seek the truth. Do not let the box of materialism limit your understanding of our world. And we do encourage you to keep searching for the truth and consider that the Bible is no ordinary book. If you have any question about the faith that you'd like addressed here, or if you'd like to learn more about how to become a Christian, you can connect with us at christ.the.oneway@gmail.com. We encourage you to try out our competition and spread the word. Do remember also to consider signing up for our mentorship opportunity. I believe it's also in the description box. Thanks again for joining us, and do have a blessed rest of your evening. Thanks again to all the speakers and for all of our audience for taking the time to join us. Take care. All right.